I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. All right. Welcome, guys. Happy Wednesday. I know it's a different day. I'm usually not live on Wednesdays, but I am, because I am not going to be here Friday and I'm not going to be here Sunday. I'm actually going to be traveling this weekend. So we have a Wednesday show. So welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. If you are new, I want to let you know that Sabs podcast is a part of Revolutionary Blackout Network. You can catch me there on Thursdays and Fridays, and you can catch me here on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sunday. Shout out to everyone watching on YouTube, Rockfin, Twitter, and Rumble. And just to give you guys an update, I know I mentioned this last night, but if you did not see this, I just want to let you know that we did receive a strike over at RBN. That's why we are not live streaming on the RBN channel. If you're not following us on Rumble, please follow us on Rumble. Also Rockfin as well. I know that Nick and CJ are going to interview Dr. West again today, but you'll want to go over to Rumble to see that. Unfortunately, the strike does last for 2 weeks. So it's 2 weeks that we cannot stream over there and we cannot upload content on RBN as well, which is just really unfortunate. But I just wanted to give you an update about that, especially for those of you who were not here last night. That's why you're not going to see us streaming on RBN or uploading videos on RBN for the next 2 weeks. So just wanted to give you an update about that. I do see my guest is here. Kamau, whenever you're ready, just give me a thumbs up and I'll bring you right in. You ready? Okay, just a second. Okay. But yeah, so please pass that on to as many people as possible. You guys share the word and let people know, because not everybody, follows the newsletter and not everybody is on Rumble. A lot of people don't download that app. So I encourage all of you to download that app if you haven't had a chance to do so. But it's really important that you follow us on other platforms and not just YouTube, because unfortunately, this is just the case right now. All right. Okay, let's go ahead and bring in my special guest. Hello, Kamau. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing? Can you hear me great?
I can hear you. You sound great.
Yay. So you guys have had trouble with YouTube also?
Oh my God. Yes. We got a second strike over at RBN. So for two weeks, we can't stream or upload.
Oh. Yep. We just got another strike, which is our, I guess we passed the probationary period, and so that strike was taken off. But now we just got a new strike. And now we have 7 days in which we can't do anything on YouTube. And so we're trying to build out Twitch, potentially Rumble, and some other platforms also. So.
No, I totally hear you. I will get into that in just a second. But today, my special guest is Kamau Franklin. He is the founder of Community Movement Builders. He's a co-host at Black Power Media, and he's also an organizer to help stop Cop City. Before we get into Cop City, Kamau, let's go ahead and talk about what just happened with Black Power Media so we can spread the word to people about that as well. Did they explain to you what the strike was for, or was it just kind of vague?
Well, it's always vague. The explanation is that we had Jared Ball does this annual thing. They haven't done it for a while. They just did it, and it's called the Hate Awards. So it's basically where they obviously just make fun of certain things and whatever. I don't think it's and it hadn't aired yet. And so apparently YouTube scanned it prior to its airing and decided to give it a strike before it even aired. And we've already done the appeal process, and still they denied the appeal and held up the strike. And so, again, it's for a program that did not even air at this particular time. And again, it's the second time it's happened to us where the appeal process is not something they don't give you any information on the proper way to appeal, what factors they're considering, what part of the video or what particular element of the video it is that they're claiming does something against their procedures. They just tell you that there's a strike. They give you a general guideline of why the strike is there, but no more specifics after that. And I think, as most people know, appealing it usually doesn't go anywhere because they just usually reaffirm the reason why they gave you the strike in the first place.
Right.
And they use language like, I was going to say really quickly, it uses language that it goes against their company guidelines. And I should say, if you've ever seen a YouTube produced movie or video or documentary, they've actually gone themselves into live production at times and done some sitcoms. There is nothing that we do on Black Power Media that doesn't have the language, insinuations, humor, topical discussions or issues that they bring up, which don't go further than anything that we've talked about on Black Power Media.
Right. For people wondering, because I get this question a lot when this happens. This has happened to a lot of people that I know. How is it that certain people can talk about certain issues and they're not penalized? People have to understand that channels that have like over 1 million subscribers, they have a representative at YouTube, the actual person that they can talk to. And we don't. It's just a generated message. So we don't have that privilege of actually just talking to someone at YouTube and saying, hey, can you fix this for us? And they'll usually be able to get it fixed. So just wanted to explain that to people. Okay, so I want to get into Cop City. I think a lot of us, for the first time that we heard about Cop City, it was after an environmental activist was killed. That was the first time I know I heard about it, and I talked about it at that point in time. But I think some of us may be curious. You're in the Atlanta area. What started this in the first place? Like, how did this even come to be, this idea of Cop City?
Well, Cop City is an idea that started with the Atlanta Police Foundation. They actually marked up the ideas or brought forth the ideas before 2020, which becomes important because during 2020 was the uprisings that took place in all across the country. But after Breonna Taylor was killed, George Floyd was killed here in Atlanta, Rashard Brooks was killed, they decided to dust off these plans and to bring them out and present them to Atlanta as a way to improve the morale. This is their quote, not mine, of police officers. And so as other folks, or as the country was wrangling with talking about defund the police, was talking about abolition of police, was talking about finding alternatives to public safety, Atlanta decided to double down and instead decided to go forth with this militarized police training center, which in our examination of this and what we read out of this was that this would do two things. One, it would continue the over-policing of Black and poor and working class communities in Atlanta. But two, this was also targeted towards the movement themselves that were opposed to Cop City. So you had such things, particularly in its original iteration. They've claimed to have made changes based on protesters, and so forth, but there is nothing in the legal document of what needs to be built or what can be built there that says any of the changes in which they've suggested are in any way, let's say, held by the force of law, right? So these are just things they have on their website that they've changed, but there's nothing whatsoever that says they have to stay with these changes. But in its original formation, it had a landing pad for Black Hawk helicopter. It had and still has 2 mock cities for urban warfare training. They claim it will be a military grade training center. It also had over a dozen firing ranges on its training center. And the other part is that the training center was scheduled or is scheduled to be built on what was supposed to be protected forest land. what we've dubbed the Walani Forest, a forest next to and or adjacent to a working class Black community that was actually promised to that community for walking trails, for biking trails, for hiking, for regular park grounds for kids nearby. All of those plans were scrapped the moment the city of Atlanta decided to come out and to create Cop City. We as organizers saw right away that this militarized police training center was not just a place to train the police, but was a place, again, to over-police Black and brown communities. 90% of the arrests that take place in Atlanta or greater Atlanta are of Black people, even though in the so-called Black Mecca, we make up less than 50% from a high of over 60% of the Black population. So again, we knew right away that this was not just a training center, but a militarized outpost that tried to stop the very people who were organizing against police violence.
It's interesting because I'm glad you explained how the plans originally started, because I assumed that this idea came to be after the George Floyd protests. But that's interesting to know that they actually started plans for this prior to that. Why do you think Atlanta? Because if I'm looking at cities, if someone wants to use the excuse, well, we're going to cities where they have a high crime rate, there are other cities that have a higher crime rate than Atlanta. Why do you think Atlanta and maybe not like Baltimore?
Well, I think the idea of a cop city has actually been put out in several different places. The largesse of this one, I think, is due to the training and or testing ground that Atlanta has become for police surveillance and over-policing. The Atlanta Police Foundation in particular is the second biggest police foundation in the country, even though the Atlanta police are no more than the 20th biggest in the country. And so I think Atlanta has become a testing ground because it has allowed itself to become a testing ground under so-called Black liberal leadership. I think Atlanta is seen as a place in the South, which is quote unquote cosmopolitan, but yet also having some conservative politics in the outer edges and of course across the state. So I think for those reasons and others, that Atlanta was seen as a place where they can pull this off. I think Atlanta, and the Atlanta Police Foundation claimed to have raised $30 million, claimed that it was going to receive only $30 million, and only is air quotes, from the city of Atlanta, but it was going to raise $60 million from corporations. And why that's important is that that's part of the idea of the Atlanta way, right? The Atlanta way is that corporations and developers say they're going to pay for something, and the role of, again, the so-called liberal democratic Black institutions and or electoral officers are to enforce what the corporations and the developers want. So we see this as a continuation of a particular way of doing business that Atlanta has always been down for, and why they thought it would be an easy push to get this through. They did not expect the pushback from organizers, activists, environmentalists, community people, civil rights workers, all of these folks who came out and said they were against it. They did not expect that pushback. And so therefore, they did not expect the battle that ensued after they came out with their plans.
And I'm glad you mentioned the corporations, because here are some of the corporations. I don't believe this is all of them, but I want people to see this because these may be corporations that you support. So Amazon, Chick-fil-A, I'm not surprised to see Chick-fil-A. Amazon, Chick-fil-A, Delta Airlines, UPS, of all people. And they're supposed to be, at least the workers are supposed to be going on strike towards the end of this month. We'll see if that happens. Home Depot, Inspire Brands. I don't know what this one is. Axon Enterprises, of course, Atlanta Police Foundation, the Waffle House. The Waffle House. Did you know, Kamau, are you aware that the Waffle House is actually one of the companies that employs, released prisoners?
Mm-hmm. I'm not yet. Waffle House has a reputation as being, they're all conservative companies, but the ownership is particularly right wing, as well as Chick-fil-A. And most of these corporations were some of the same corporations that during the uprisings of 2020 and before claimed to believe that Black Lives Matter. And within a short period of time, they were having private negotiations and conversations with the Atlanta Police Foundation to fund this project, because for them, corporate lives matter and or private property matters. And I think after the 2020 uprisings, again, not only in Atlanta, but all across the country, these same corporations wanted to create a sense of stability for themselves, which is why we've had also this, let's say, this reconciliated narrative that from going from the police, again, don't solve crime at the height of the uprisings and talking about alternatives to public safety, to moving back towards all of a sudden we're in some high crime wave and we need the police to protect us. And again, not just from right wing figures, but as we remember in the speech that Biden gave when he said, "Don't defund the police, fund the police," in the State of the Union address. Both aisles, both Democrats and Republicans, stood up and cheered Biden, gave him a standing ovation for that line.
No, you're right about that. This is the Atlanta Hawks symbol, correct?
That is correct.
The basketball team.
Who are owned by the Cox company or Cox Enterprises, which also owns the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which is also a huge supporter of building Cop City, both financially through their foundations and editorially through the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.
Have any of the NBA players been involved in stopping or protesting to stop Cop City?
So far, not. We've not been able to reach the ball players directly and have them come out with a statement or even talk to them about coming out with a statement. Some of these are the same ball players who, again, doing Black Lives Matter or wore shirts that only said Black Lives Matter, but I can't breathe, or we can't breathe. But we have not been able to reach them to come out and firmly be against Cop City. And I will say, I mean, you know, a lot of local, so-called local celebrities, i.e. a Killer Mike or a T.I., folks who are connected, again, to the Atlanta Black political establishment, have also not come out against Cop City. We think that some of these folks who claim progressive politics, again, have decided to lay low on this, decided to not upset the mayor and the city administration. And again, that is the capitalist apparatus protecting itself, and basically the corporations and developers telling the lower level members of the capitalist class, let's say, or those who enforce capitalist rule, that they should not say anything and or be for this. And so we've had here a terrible inconsistency of those who claim to be concerned about Black people, concerned about issues of poverty, concerned about issues of public safety, even as far as concerned about police murders of Black people. They have not said a word about what possibly can happen once this largest police training center is created.
I'm very disappointed about Killer Mike and especially T.I. T.I. went to prison. You know, boy, what a joke. JP Morgan and Chase, that doesn't surprise me. I feel like we talk about them every week. And of course, Wells Fargo also doesn't surprise me. They stole people's homes. So I wanted everyone to see this. I want you to see the corporations, and I don't think this is even all of them, but some of the corporations that are supporting this endeavor. Do you think that Atlanta is just the beginning in reference to a cop city? Do you feel like there may be more cop cities created across the United States?
Yeah, most definitely. I think even before Atlanta, Chicago has created its version of a cop city. There have been cities in Hawaii and California. Once this gets pushed through, or if it gets pushed through, I think other cities will begin to look at this model. And we have to be sure to name the model. What we have here is, since the Mike Brown killing, these police foundations, which existed before, but when the conversations began to be about defunding the police or finding alternatives to public safety, and even though no city really defunded the police or even decreased the police budget, the very call for that activated these police foundations to now be these new avenues of direct funding for the police. And so now you have these police foundations, which are playing this particular role of receiving largesse from these corporations, and then either giving free giveaways to individual police officers. Again, during the uprisings, the Atlanta Police Foundation gave a $500 bonus to the police, to individual police officers. The Atlanta Police Foundation provides a network of surveillance cameras, which makes Atlanta the most surveilled city in the country. And if I remember my stats correctly, the ninth most surveilled city in all the world, only China having the top 8 above that. So Atlanta is the most surveilled city other than cities in China in the whole entire country. And that is due to the Atlanta Police Foundation. So this mechanism of funding and the fact that the Atlanta Police Foundation will be responsible for the training. So get this, a private nonprofit 501c3 that is funded mainly by private corporations and some city money is now going to be in charge of the actual training of a municipal police force. This is the first time in history that's happening. But again, this provides a pathway for other cities to do their version of this private public partnerships that, again, puts foundations in control of how policing happens. And I'll say this one last thing on the police foundation. It is a very conservative foundation. The head of the foundation is a right-wing Republican. So these foundations are also lobbying and they're getting resources, again, from the city. There's a tax break at the state level to give to these foundations, and they're getting money from private corporations. They are bringing their conservative viewpoints and values and putting that pressure also, not that it needs a lot of pressure, but putting that kind of pressure again on these liberal public officials who basically will say whatever they are told to say via conversations and workshops and retreats and who knows what else through the Atlanta Police Foundation. So yes, this is just the beginning of something that we are going to see across the country once they see this model at play.
I know there was, I did see video footage of you on the ground at a protest in reference to city councilors when they were about to vote on this measure in reference to Cop City. Are you surprised that so many African American city councilors voted in favor of Cop City?
Not at all, because I think this is not just Atlanta again, but the so-called Black Mecca has always been only a Black Mecca for a few Black people and usually a pay and play as you go system. And so when I spoke about the Atlanta Way is basically, hey, because you guys had the numbers, you guys being Black folks, we have the numbers. Without a fight, the business community said, we will sort of, without a large civil rights movement, without protests happening, we will take down overt Jim Crow as long as there's no protest happening here. And in exchange, we will continue to get to run the system as is, the economic and financial system as is, which means the developers and the corporations call the shots in Atlanta. And so Atlanta is gentrifying at a huge rate. And I'm sure this is happening, of course, all across the country in urban areas, which is basically following a French model where middle class and upper middle class, basically the workers for the corporations, they get to live in the city proper. And then the workers have to live outside the city because they no longer can afford it. It's almost like an economic sundown city where you can come in, you can work, but after your shift is over, you have no reason to be in town. And that's what Atlanta is developing into. And it's done so not behind the back of this Black economic class, not around the corner from this Black economic class, not in the shadows, but with full consent, awareness, and participation on the gentrification of Atlanta. So there's no surprise that they've done this. It's no surprise that this is what's been happening in Atlanta for upwards of 40 or 50 years. All the public housing was destroyed under a Black mayor and majority Black city council. Homeless folks were given one-way bus tickets out of Atlanta during the Olympics under a Black mayor and Black city council. This is what really the Atlanta way is. It's punishing poor and working class, particularly Black and brown folks, and pushing them out the city as those who can afford reap all the benefits.
This is very scary, Kamau. Like, I remember, and I don't know how young everyone is in the chat. I know some people probably weren't even born in the 90s yet, but I remember in the 90s, like Atlanta was the place that everybody wanted to move to, especially if you wanted to enter the music business. People were like, you moved to Atlanta. I remember so many like music groups like started in Atlanta, and that was kind of seen as like this Black like haven. What happened? Did people just sell out, or what happened to
I think
Atlanta?
Atlanta has been good at creating a particular image of itself. And I think there's always been a certain upper 1 or 2% of the Black social strata, which either has resources or were able to get resources. And so it has been a friendly business environment for some Black businesses. But we always have to remember the vast majority of Black folks aren't singers, they aren't actors, they're not in the top 1 or 5% of economic or of income levels. They are the working class folks. They are the people who are the bus drivers, the city employees, at this point, the train drivers, sanitation. These are the folks who work office and clerical, fast food restaurants. The bulk of any city like Atlanta has always been poor and working class people. But these elected officials have only demanded, begged for at times, but demanded the votes of these folks. And once they get into office, they've never tried to address their concerns. It's always been what the corporations again want and what the developers want. And again, that's why there's probably only a few working class and poor intact Black communities left in Atlanta, because everyone else has been pushed out to the suburbs and surrounding areas.
The last time I visited Atlanta, I was actually pretty surprised because I have friends that live down there, and I just noticed the change. Very different, very much gentrified. And I wanted to ask you about Buckhead as well, because I heard a rumor that Buckhead was trying to become its own either
Mhm.
town or zip or something like that. Is that still happening? Do you know?
Well, it's interesting, particularly how that also plays within the Cop City drama. Um, Buckhead, which is basically the northern richest part of the city. It's where most of the corporations have their headquarters. It's where most of the rich folks who are in Atlanta live, and it's where the wealth, so-called wealth, is generated. They, particularly after the uprisings, began to protest about high crime, even though I think another survey was taken that Buckhead would be considered the sixth safest city in the country if it were a city, right? But because of the pictures of people breaking into the mall, the Buckhead Mall, that was used as a rationale for Atlanta is suffering from crime and we must stop crime. They demanded additional police stations, which they got. And they've played a huge role in furthering the call for Cop City. And under the guise of they are threatening to leave Atlanta because they're saying it's not safe, through a mechanism within the state legislature, which is a very conservative state legislature. And the city council person in Atlanta is the only independent. And when we say independent, what we really mean is Republican city council person in the city, who I must say almost won the mayoral election twice by 700 votes, and she's a white conservative. So, and both times the mayors that did win, the Black mayors that did win, basically pulled out their Atlanta card and talked about what schools they went to, how they are the true Atlanta, how Black they are. They called out people like Killer Mike and T.I. to come out and stand with them, and they won those elections by 700 votes. But the area of Buckhead has teamed up with the governor to put pressure. And again, I'm not saying a lot of pressure is needed. Basically, they told the mayor, we got this through open records requests where there was an email exchange between the mayor and the governor, that the governor promised basically to put a cap on and or to stop the bid of Buckhead to become an independent city, because the governor liked how Dickens was handling policing in Atlanta. And so that was, i.e., code word for bringing out additional precincts or substations in Buckhead and the development of Cop City. And so the governor of Georgia basically stomped out the bill in the House of Representatives to stop the bill going forward to call for an independent city. And now that what you have here is year after year, they're going to do this to basically put pressure on whatever the mayor is to say, if you don't follow what we want, what's going to happen is Buckhead is going to go and be an independent city, and all that wealth will go with it.
Do you feel like the entertainment business has helped or hurt Atlanta in reference to Cop City. So for those who are not aware, there are a lot of celebrities that live in Atlanta. I mean, you have Tyler Perry, you have Usher, like there's a lot of them there. Do you feel like that's helped in reference to Cop City? Have any of those people, like Tyler Perry's very vocal, Usher's very vocal, have any of those people stepped up to push back against this or offered any type of a statement?
No, it's been the non-helpful variety. Tyler Perry, in particular, the city council person who actually put forth the ordinance to develop Cop City, when that person lost their race, after they did that, they lost their city council seat to somebody who, at least at the time, was advocating against Cop City. Tyler Perry hired that person right away to work at their office, to work at Tyler Perry Studios. Tyler Perry every year now does a banquet to honor the police for their service in Atlanta. And so the conservative nature of celebrities who are trying to protect their wealth or their reputation, or who don't want to come out and make a strong stance against the city itself, that is what's held true. That these entertainers have either been silent, or they have capitulated, or they've been on the same side of the Atlanta Police Foundation via their silence or their public statements. And so they've been most of them have been of nil support or help in stopping Cop City.
Donald Glover is another one. Any word from him?
Nothing to my knowledge, nothing at all. He said nothing.
Interesting. He had a whole show called Atlanta, for those who don't know. This is a question from a friend of the show, Roger Meadows. Is there a local ballot measure in DeKalb or Fulton County to stop Cop City?
There is a local ballot measure, a referendum that's happening in Atlanta proper. We considered doing one. Now I'll explain what that is. We considered doing one in Fulton and or DeKalb County. Atlanta is in both of those counties, but majority in Fulton County. Cop City is actually in DeKalb County. It's a piece of land that Atlanta owns. The reason we couldn't do DeKalb County is because no ordinance was passed in DeKalb County to make this go forward. And so the resolutions, the referendums only allow us to attack, let's say, a ordinance that was passed either by the city council or by the commissioners at a county level. And so that is why we had to do the city of Atlanta. So currently, we have a referendum as sort of like what we may be our last legal avenue at trying to defeat Cop City, our last sort of direct avenue at trying to defeat Cop City. And basically that referendum is that if we can collect upwards of 70,000 signatures of people who are registered to vote, then we can basically make a demand that at the next election in Atlanta, which is in November, that they have to put on the ballot the idea for folks to vote, for the people to decide whether or not they want Cop City or not. And so we are now doing that. We've raised, it's been an incredible continuation of the campaign to stop Cop City. And again, it's added on national organizations, foundations, and other groups in a way that we could not have even expected when we first all started this campaign 2.5 years ago. And so these organizations have jumped in. There's boots on the ground. We have collected close to half of our signatures. We've hired a professional canvassing outfit, which is going to start collecting the rest of the signatures needed. We're pretty confident, although of course not completely, that we're going to reach our signature level. And then it goes to the city council to supposedly parse through those signatures, which we think will be another hiccup or a place where they try to derail this, to decide if the signatures are valid. And of course, if they decide the signatures are valid, then it goes on the process for the election. If for whatever reason they decide that they're not, then again, I'm assuming we're going to have some further court battles. But even if we win the referendum, let's say it goes to the ballot, my assumption is that the city of Atlanta, as it has already started, will be going into federal court, as it already has, and state court to try to stop our process from going forward and stopping Cop City. That is how committed they are. Even if we get a majority of the votes or people who go to the polls to say no Cop City, they have already said, stated, and acted to go into court to stop us from enacting this referendum from becoming basically law of the land in Atlanta, and for them to stop building Cop City.
Are any of the civil rights activists from the past or present involved in stopping Cop City?
mostly not in good ways. So the city of Atlanta, this is now 2 or 3 months ago, called when it felt the pressure. One of the things that we all have to be proud of is that we've pushed the city and the state to the brink in terms of trying to stop this project, where they've belatedly, but still, have tried to pull out all the stops to try to show that there is some public sentiment for the building of Cop City. So they just recently, about 2 months ago, did a huge press conference on the steps of City Hall, where they brought out all the past mayors, city council members, business leaders, some so-called Black celebrities, mostly Black men dressed in suits, including Andy Young, who literally was wheeled out to be there, to say that they were all in favor, and Black ministers and preachers also, to say that they were all in favor of Cop City. So the Black bourgeoisie, the Black upper class, have all come out and rallied behind the mayor and rallied with the corporations and developers to try to get this passed. This has truly been a grassroots effort of organizers, anarchists, revolutionaries, socialists, again, voting rights groups, environmentalists, community people. This has truly been a grassroots effort to stop Cop City. And the fact that we've gotten this far speaks to the amazing power of organizing.
This is what I continue to tell people you cannot rely on. It's really sad sometimes, Kamau, because we think back to like some of the civil rights leaders and activists and things like that. And then we look at where they are today, and it's just, you just wonder like what happened to them. Like it's kind of sad in a way. I'm curious also to see, this question came from the audience. I think it's a good question. Is the problem the privatization and the politicization of the police? Is that the problem?
No, the problem is that the system of policing is a militarized force that operates on behalf of corporations and developers that works to the detriment of poor and working class Black communities. And so that, in its essence, is the problem. The problem is that, again, the police arrests, 90% of the arrests that the police make, I should say, are of Black people in a city that is no more than 50% Black. The problem is that Black folks get over sentenced. The problem is that Black people get harassed. The problem is that Black people get over arrested. And obviously the problem is that Black people get killed. That is the problem. The problem is not whether or not the police have training. The problem is not whether or not the police are good individuals. The problem is not whether or not police treat their spouses or their dogs or their children well. The problem is that when the police are called to go into communities and to have quotas and arrest people in mass or stop people, they will do that. The problem is when the police are called out into the streets to stop movements, to stop protests, to clear people off the streets, they will do that. They will follow orders, and the orders that they are following are on the behalf of corporate leaders, developers, and the city of Atlanta. They are not on behalf of the people.
Any word from Warnock or Ossoff?
Warnock and Ossoff came out with lukewarm statements, not about the building of Cop City. They've stayed out of that, even though we've tried to pressure them to say something. Warnock, who, at one point I help him get his first civil disobedience arrest around expansion of Medicaid here in Atlanta. Warnock, who claims to be progressive in particular, has not said anything about Cop City except that he's studying it. The only thing we got Warnock and Ossoff to come out, the two senators here, was when the Atlanta police with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation went into the Atlanta bail fund and arrested them and attempted to charge them with white collar crimes, but really was going after them as a key link to the movement infrastructure around stopping Cop City and supporting movement organizing. So the Atlanta Bail Fund has been around for 6 or 7 years. Prior to even the organizing against Cop City, it has provided bail for anybody who has been arrested at a protest to make sure that people can, one, feel safe and participating in protests, aka the civil rights movement, where folks would not have gotten involved in some cases if they did not know that there was a bail fund, so that they didn't have to sit in Southern segregationist jails all night. And so we have a bail fund here in Atlanta, as many places do across the country, that help make sure organizers and activists can be free and fight their charges on the outside and continue on with their lives as opposed to sitting on the inside. The Atlanta way, which is part of a larger task force with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, with the DeKalb County Police, with the Atlanta Police, with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, with Homeland Security, they decided to target the Atlanta Solidarity Fund and to arrest those who were the leadership of that fund. Warnock and Ossoff came out with a statement about that, but only that. They've been quiet. They've been reserved. They've withheld any opinion whatsoever when it comes to the Atlanta, the Cop City building that we are opposing. And again, these are people who claim to be progressive, people who spoke out in other areas and other places, but not said a word here about what's happening in part of the city that they're supposed to be representing.
That's right. And some of those organizers involved in the bail fund, the media has identified them as domestic terrorists. Like, that term is just kind of thrown around now to people that are trying to actually just help people get out of jail. So that term has been pretty loose now, and they're just putting it where they want to put it. And I think people need to be very cautious of that. They could call us that too, you guys, anytime that we have a protest.
Well, part of what the other thing about what's the testing ground around Atlanta is that, as your audience probably knows, 42 people here have now been arrested and charged with state level domestic terrorism charges. It's the first time this statute has ever been used. In fact, the statute was passed because of the church killings in South Carolina. So when a white man went into the church and killed upwards of a dozen Black people, Georgia passed a domestic terrorism statute and has only now used it. And who have they used it against? Forced offenders. They've used it against people who are literally sitting in trees, in tree huts, and sitting in campsites below the trees. That's who's been the target of these domestic terrorism charges. The vast majority of folks who've been arrested, these people, neither before their arrest have ever been said and or shown to be engaged in any other activity, just to be clear, other than sitting in trees, other than having a campsite. It's akin to doing it's akin to charging a Dr. King, again, during the heights of the civil rights movement, with domestic terrorism for kneeling in front of a police station. So these folks here, again, the task force that's been created is a testing ground. How far will they get with these charges? And if they get very far, they will be bringing charges like this to a community near you the next time people decide to go out and protest, engage in civil disobedience, and or direct action.
That's right. This is why it's important to pay attention to local politics. We may not live in Atlanta, but it could be your city next. Kamau, 2 more questions before you go. Number 1, how can people help support the efforts to stop Cop City?
If they go to the website Cop City Vote or Vote Cop City, you'll see things about the referendum. If they go to communitymovementbuilders.org, they will see a list of other ways in which they can participate and support, everything from holding rallies and demonstrations in your city, doing direct action or civil disobedience against the corporations, which again, these are national, if not international corporations who have headquarters all across the country, doing protests there, looking and seeing the developers doing protests against the actual developers of Cop City. So those are the things that we're asking people to do. And those are the ways in which they can find out more how to support and how to help.
Awesome. And before you go, where can people find you?
They can go to communitymovementbuilders.org, and I'm individually on social media, but they can go to communitymovementbuilders.org to find out more about our work and more about the organization itself.
Thank you so much, Kamau.
Thank you for having me. I feel like I finally made it because I've now been on your program. And so I'm happy to be in fellowship and camaraderie with you. And I appreciate you letting me come on for a few minutes.
Oh, thank you so much. Talk to you later.
Peace.
All right, guys. I hope you learned a lot there. I think more people need to know more about Cop City. Like I said, you may not live in Atlanta, but it could still happen in your city next. It could be coming to your city next. And we've seen things like this happen before, where locally something will happen in one city or one state, and then it just kind of spreads across the country. So we need to pay attention to that, very much so. I want to go ahead and shout out some of these comments, and then we'll shout out patrons, and then we'll get started with our other stories today. Thank you so much for this, Telesu. DOD also providing lots of police funding and equipment. There you go. Thank you for the super chat, DC. Did you know that the symbol of the National Sheriff's Union is a literal fascist? Like Mussolini's fascist party, originally from the Roman Empire. I did not know that. That is very interesting. Justin says, you guys didn't know about Tyler Perry. Dude's been foul for a good minute now. Glad the truth is coming out about that fool. Justin. Gamer says, stop Cop City, 100%. I'll go ahead and take that comment on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. The Boulay selling us out as usual, Sabby. Since 1988, New Yorkers been moving to the ATL. The problem is not big money, but the fact that the big money doesn't represent us. We must replace corporate money with cooperative ownership money. This is more representative of our values. Thank you so much for that, Roger. 100%, guys. This is why I keep saying worker co-ops, because we have to really find a way to take that power away from a lot of these corporations. Before you know it, they're going to own everything, including us. Let's keep it real. All right. Want to go ahead and shout out Sabby patrons. Thank you guys so much for your support. I really do appreciate it. If you're interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories: Ultimate, Sabinators, Sabsters. Don't forget about Sabbies. And of course, members. All of their names are listed here. You can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen there on the ticker. And I want to give a special shout out to new Sabby patrons. Uh-oh, where did it go? Where did it go? Oh, I skipped a page somehow. I'll fix that. Want to give a special shout out to new Sabby patrons. Over here, we call them newbies. Let's give it up for JKH. Thank you so much, guys. I really do appreciate all of your support. We have a pretty interesting show today. I know some of you are probably like, Sabby is live on a Wednesday? I'm here. Just a reminder, I'm not here Friday or Sunday this week. I am going to be traveling, so no live streams for me on Friday or Sunday, but I'll be live again tomorrow night. But let's go ahead and get into that thumbnail so you can see the stories that we're going to discuss, because I have some interesting things to talk about today. One of them I'm really giddy about, okay? Today, we are going to discuss Dr. Cornel West versus Pundits. And yes, you can see there's Anderson Cooper there in the middle, in the green square. And to the right of him is James Carville, also known as the Crypt Keeper. We're going to get into that. I'm also going to discuss Tupac investigation update. Yes, this is huge. If you grew up listening to Tupac like I did when Tupac was still alive, and you remember when Tupac was murdered, there has been an update in reference to that story, and I'm excited to talk about that. We're also going to go through the timeline of what happened to him that night. I'm also going to discuss, oh boy, Russia cancels grain. This is huge. I warned you guys about this. I was afraid that something like this could happen. It's going to affect a lot of countries. We'll get into that. And also, of course, Kamau Franklin was just here to talk about Cop City. So let's go ahead and get into our first story. It appears that Russia has had enough in reference to this war with Ukraine, and they have decided to hit back. Now, if you remember a while back, I did explain to you that the U.S. government did implement sanctions on Russia, and those sanctions actually didn't just have an effect on Russia, but it actually harmed other countries more so, like the UK, like Germany, who's going through a recession right now. It affected other countries in Europe. Well, it appears, I believe, Vladimir Putin has had enough, and he has decided to halt grain distribution from Russia through the Black Sea. Now, why is this incredibly important? First, we're going to get into this clip that explains him halting the grain, and then we're going to go to another clip that will show you what exactly happens if Russia decides to stop grain distribution, which they have already agreed to do so. And we're going to talk about who's going to be affected by that. This is one of the reasons why we continue to say we need to call for de-escalation, not escalation in reference to this war. It's not just about the nuclear war. It's also about those countries that depend on that grain from Russia. Let's go ahead and get into this clip here.
You're watching Al Jazeera. A reminder of our top stories this hour. The Kremlin says it's halted its participation in the Black Sea grain deal. Moscow says its conditions for extending the deal had not been fulfilled. It was due to expire later on Monday evening. All right, well, let's look into the story a bit more, because this grain deal was hugely vital, not only for those in the region, but for many around the world who are dependent upon Ukraine, one of the biggest grain producers in the world. Let's speak now to Rob McBride for more on this. And Rob, as I was saying there, the Kremlin indicating that it would not throw its weight behind this all-important deal. Tell us more.
Yeah, that's right. There has been some speculation about whether the Kremlin would renew this deal. It has been reluctant to. It only gave a 60-day renewal, which expires today, Monday, instead of the usual 4 months renewal period that it was meant to give. And it has just announced in the last half hour or so that from today, Monday, this deal will cease to exist. It has said that it will return to the deal once conditions affecting Russia are fulfilled. Now, we don't know quite what they mean by that, but it is known that Russia has been pushing in return for renewing this deal some kind of sanctions relief on the sanctions imposed on it. In return, there's been talk about possibly allowing one of its banks to have access to the international money transfer system, the so-called SWIFT system. But so there have been negotiations going on behind the scenes. They say that this is not connected at all to the attack on the Kerch Bridge, that Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, has already outlined the problems with the deal beforehand. But that is the latest news. They said that this deal will not now be renewed.
Let me pause here for a second. So yes, there was an attack on one of the Russia bridges. I forgot to mention that part. There was an attack. Now, some people have assumed that this is in response to that. Vladimir Putin has said, no, this was already basically decided, that this was a possibility, the direction that they were going to go in reference to the grain deal. But it did happen after that bridge was attacked in Russia. So some people have made that speculation. This is all just starting to come to a head, and it's very, very scary. Like, it's just, we'll get into how people are going to be affected, and what is the U.S. government going to do in reference to the grain issue? Is the U.S. government going to step in and maybe become a distributor and help those countries get grain, get fertilizer, so they can continue to feed their people? What happens now? Another reason why people are calling for de-escalation.
Rob, what do we imagine the likely reaction from the Ukrainians will be around this decision?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's probably mixed reactions. Yes, I think everybody accepts that this deal has been extremely important in getting millions of tons of Ukrainian food out to world markets. Remember, this time last year, we were in pretty dire straits. We were talking about price hikes of around 30% in the cost of food, grain on the world markets, the impact of that on famine in different parts of Africa, and so on. Since then, the food prices have come down somewhat. The food inflation, we know, is still a problem. But farmers here in Ukraine have found other ways of getting their grain, their harvest out to world markets, using land borders, using ports on the Danube River instead of going across the Black Sea, which needs Russian permission. And also, the number of ships that have been allowed under this grain deal have fallen dramatically to only, in some respects, a couple of ships a day. The Russians have been accused by the Ukrainians of dragging out the inspections on these ships and really restricting the number. So a lot of farmers here in Ukraine have found different ways of getting their food out to world markets. And I think a lot of the farmers we've been talking to in the southern part of Ukraine are also concerned about the Russians putting on unacceptable conditions for them renewing this deal. So there is, I think, a mixed reaction here in Ukraine.
All right, Rob, many thanks for that. Rob McBride on that breaking news that Russia has decided it will not throw its weight and support behind renewing that all-important grain deal from Ukraine. Thanks, Rob.
Okay, so we want to get into the consequences, right? We want to get into what is going to happen in this type of situation. And then we'll get into Vladimir Putin's response in reference to the bridge attack. So let's go ahead and go into this clip.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has not yet said if Russia would renew the deal under which Moscow allowed Ukraine to ship its grain across the Black Sea.
So this is before that decision was made, just FYI.
The deal, brokered by the United Nations and Turkey, signed by Moscow and Kiev in July of 2022, is set to expire on the 18th of July. Crucially, the pact established a protected sea corridor, allowing Ukraine's agricultural goods to reach global markets. Now, here's what happens if the deal is not extended.
Here we go.
The basics. Ukraine is a major producer of grains and oilseeds. The interruption to its exports at the outbreak of the war pushed global food prices to record highs. The current deal, agreed some 5 months after the war started, helped to bring down prices and to ease a global food crisis.
Did you guys hear that? A global food crisis. See, this is the thing, like these decisions, like this conflict, these actions doesn't just affect Ukraine and Russia. It affects everyone.
Ukraine grain has also played a direct role with over 725,000 tons, or 2.2% of the supplies shipped through the corridor used by the UN World Food Programme.
Pause right here. Okay. Look at the countries that are listed. Nations such as Ethiopia, Somalia, and Yemen depend on aid. Let's talk about this for just a second. A couple of days ago, I showed you a clip from a global conference where there were leaders from African countries pleading for a ceasefire and a peace negotiation in reference to this conflict with Russia and Ukraine. And one of the issues that they brought up was they do not want people in their country to starve. They depend on those supplies from Russia. It's not just Russia and Ukraine. These countries in particular, Ethiopia, Somalia, and Yemen, those countries are already struggling. We've talked about the conflict that's happening in Ethiopia. We've talked about the conflict in Somalia and how the U.S. has continued to drop drones in Somalia. We've talked about how Ilhan Omar spoke out about that. We've also talked about the situation in Yemen where there were certain members of Congress that really wanted to call for an end to the war in Yemen and the conflict in Yemen. And Bernie Sanders received pushback from Joe Biden and said, you better not do that because it's probably not going to pass. And so it wasn't even brought to the floor. It was supposed to be brought to the floor for a vote. So that never even happened. So you have people right now in Yemen who are starving, people in Somalia who are starving, people in Ethiopia who are starving, and they depend on this aid. So now this is going to affect them. And it's almost a way to it's just like nobody seems to care that these people are going to be affected. So when people say like, we have to protect the people in Ukraine, we have to protect the women and the children, I keep telling you, it's not really about protecting the people. It's more so about overthrowing Vladimir Putin, implementing regime change. That's what this is really about. But look at all the countries that are starting to suffer as a result of that. Do you guys think that people in Yemen can take any more suffering? Somalia? Ethiopia? Let's continue.
Countries such as Ethiopia, Somalia, and Yemen depend on the grain aid. The big question now, what happens if the deal ends? Now, prices for some staple foods will likely rise, but the situation is better than in the months after the war began. Grain supplies have improved from other producers such as Russia and Brazil. As per last week's data, wheat prices, the main ingredient in bread, have fallen by about 17% so far this year, while corn is down by around 26%. The current global food crisis, however, is far from over. The World Food Programme said last month that multiple emergencies had overlapped, creating the largest and most complex hunger and humanitarian crisis in over 70 years.
But this is a way of basically, if you think about it, remember, the US government implemented those sanctions on Russia, and now this is kind of like a clapback from Russia. I mean, it's just, what do you do? What do you do? That's why this should have never been the moment they kept continuing to say, we're going to send more billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine. And I'm like, you guys know they can't win this war. You know they can't win this. Then they're like, we're going to send them cluster ammunitions. I'm like, what are we doing? What is the U.S. government doing? Continuing to press and I feel like poking the bear, so to speak. And now we have this. Let's continue a little bit more here, and then we're going to get to the response from Putin.
In 2022, a record 349 million people experienced acute hunger, and 772,000 teetered on the edge of a famine. Let's now take a look at the state of global food supplies. Global corn stocks began the 2021-22 season at a 6-year low. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, one of the world's top corn exporters, led to a significant jump in prices. A sharp increase in exports from Brazil has helped to boost supplies, along with the export of nearly 17 million tons of corn through the corridor. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has forecast global corn stocks by the end of 2023-24 season will be at a 5-year high. According to U.S. data, global wheat stocks are tighter and were at a 7-year low at the end of the 22-23 season, but looking forward, a slight increase is forecast for 23-24. If the deal ends, can the corridor operate without Russia? Let's take a look at this scenario next. Now, Ukraine's ports were blocked until the agreement was reached in July of last year. It is unclear whether it would be possible to ship grain if Russia withdrew.
And I'm going to stop there because they did say in the more current video that they're trying to see if they can have those supplies shipped without going through the Black Sea, right? But there's another issue, and we talked about the Crimea bridge. So apparently Ukraine has attacked the Crimea bridge, and what's really interesting is I've noticed that there hasn't been any response from the Biden administration. I haven't seen them say anything about this attack. I haven't seen them condemn this attack. But if it was the other way around, I think you all know how that would go. Where Vladimir Putin has issued a response vowing retaliation. And I think everybody needs to pay attention to this, because this is a warning sign to you all.
Russian leader Vladimir Putin is vowing retaliation today after Ukrainian forces unleashed a pre-dawn strike on the bridge that connects Crimea to Russia. Sources tell CNN 2 Russians were killed in the attack. It is the second such one on the strategic and symbolic 12-mile crossing since the start of the war. Putin was quick to label today's strike as a, quote, terrorist attack. This comes the same day that Russia has ended a deal critical to the world's food supply. The Black Sea Grain Initiative officially expires in less than an hour. This will likely stop the flow of supplies from what is commonly referred to as Europe's breadbasket. It is a decision that could tip millions throughout the world into hunger. CNN's Alex Marquardt is in the southern Ukrainian port city of Odessa for us as Russia insists it will overcome Ukraine's latest bridge strike.
A brazen strike on Russia's bridge that links it to the illegally annexed Crimean Peninsula. The roadway a mangled mess after Ukrainian sea drones targeted it just before dawn. At least 2 people, Russian parents of a small girl, were killed in the attack, according to Russian officials. The child was injured. Traffic.
See, the civilian deaths. Like, people talk about war like it's no big deal, that it's just a bunch of soldiers on the battlefield. You rarely hear them, especially mainstream media, you rarely hear them talk about what happens to the civilians. These just a family just driving across the bridge, just minding their own business.
On the critical highway, grinding to a halt. The trains temporarily stopped. Tonight, Russian President Vladimir Putin called it a terrorist attack, vowing there will be a response and that the Russian military is preparing options. New satellite imagery shows extensive damage from the blast, a section of the bridge knocked out. Russian authorities now say it won't be fully functional until November. Ukraine quickly claimed that it was behind the secret operation, a rare admission, saying it was a joint operation by Ukraine's Navy and security services, which cryptically tweeted the bridge was sleeping again. A reference to a huge explosion in October last year as a fuel truck exploded on the 12-mile, 19-kilometer-long bridge, igniting a passing train. Putin then called it an act of sabotage, appearing on the bridge when it was reopened 2 months later. A direct strike on his nearly $4 billion project connecting Russia to Crimea that he personally inaugurated in 2018. It has become a vital supply route for both the Crimean population and the Russian military's fight in southern Ukraine. Ukraine sees the bridge not just as a ripe, but highly symbolic target. Hours after the blast, Russia announced it is pulling out of the international agreement that allows Ukraine to ship grain to the world.
Today, but remember, they said in the previous video that they had already made plans to do that. So just keep that in mind, because CNN is not going to tell you that part.
This decision by the Russian Federation will strike a blow to people in need everywhere. But it will not stop our efforts to facilitate the unimpeded access to global markets for food products and fertilizers from both Ukraine and the Russian Federation.
Russia claims the deal only benefited Ukraine, while its own food and fertilizer have been blocked. The decision was not connected, Russia said, to the bridge attack. The last grain ship sailed from Odessa's port on Sunday. A United Nations official tells CNN that Russia's announcement appears final. And Jake, the United Nations has severely criticized this, the global community calling it unconscionable. That is the word of U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who went on to say that Russia is responsible for denying food to people who desperately need it. Global, widespread condemnation. As for that bridge attack, Jake, Vladimir Putin says he wants work to restore it to begin immediately, but it won't be back up and running until mid-September at the earliest, according to a senior Russian official, and that's just half the roadway. It won't be fully operational until 3.5 months from now, the beginning of November. This was a...
I just want to pause here for a second because they said that Russia is responsible for denying food to millions of people. Is the U.S. responsible for denying food to millions of people when the U.S. sanctions all these countries? When the U.S. starves people in all these countries, like they're starving kids in Afghanistan? You'll never hear CNN say that. You'll never hear them say the United States government is responsible for starving all those kids in Afghanistan. You'll never hear them say that.
Significant attack by Ukraine, Jake.
Alex Marquardt in Odessa for us. Thank you so much. Let's talk more about this bridge attack with retired U.S. Brigadier General Steve Anderson, who was most recently in charge of Army logistics, readiness, weapon sustainment, and war reserves. General Anderson, thanks so much for being here. So Russia spent nearly $4 billion building the 12-mile bridge after it illegally annexed Crimea in 2014. Putin said today that the bridge attack had no military significance. I find that hard to believe. Is that true?
It's not true at all, Jake. Absolutely. I mean, the hits just keep on coming for Vladimir Putin. I mean, this is just another chink in the armor. I mean, we had the mutiny 3 weeks ago with Prigozhin, and we hear more and more about insubordination within the ranks at senior levels of the general officers in the Russian military. And now you got an attack on this bridge right here, the longest bridge in all of Europe, built 5 years ago with great fanfare by Vladimir Putin. So to attack this is strategically and politically very, very significant. Now, operation.
So you see how they're making excuses for the attacks coming from Ukraine? Everyone noticed this? He mentions the mutiny in reference to Prigozhin. We went over that. We covered that. They seem to be friends after. After that, they seem to, resolve everything and be okay with each other afterwards. I don't know. Does that seem like a mutiny to you?
Probably not that significant. I think they're probably going to be able to repair this within a week or two, perhaps. It's not quite as significant as the attack that occurred back in October, but nevertheless, you know, anytime you can stop logistics from flowing in to Crimea and to resupply the troops up there in the north, this is a very, very good day for the Ukrainian army.
And what type of weapon was used, and what might that reveal about Ukraine's capabilities weeks into this counteroffensive?
Well, Jake, this reveals an awful lot. I mean, this is essentially a surfboard on steroids. I mean, think about this thing traveling at about 80 kilometers an hour with about 200 kilograms of explosives on it.
And now they are starting to brag about the weapon that was used, but have you noticed nothing about the people who were killed that were on that bridge? But see, when it's the other way around, when it's Russia that does it, they're like, these Ukrainian civilians were almost as if they don't care about Russian civilians. They don't have that same type of sympathy towards them.
What they were able to do was use this device and go about 500 kilometers all the way out here, undetected by the Russian Navy. I mean, that's a very significant thing. That shows that they have the ability now to conduct deep strikes against the Russians, and that puts all the Russian Navy at risk. I mean, any ship that's out here in the Black Sea now could potentially be targeted by the Ukrainians, who are showing themselves to be incredibly resourceful, incredibly intelligent, and resilient in putting weapons like this into the war.
And
yeah, this is just going to make things worse. So you heard there that Vladimir Putin said that there will be retaliation, that there will be more escalation in reference to this conflict. Like, this is not making things better. I feel like this is just prolonging this conflict with Russia and Ukraine. And I feel like that's exactly what the United States government wants. I think they just want to continue to feed the MIC, and they don't really care whether or not they save the women and children like they say that they do. They just want to make money. War is a profit and peace is not. We have to remember that. A-Ross says, because the last time they showed civilian deaths, the Vietnam anti-war movement spread like wildfire across the nation. That's right. That was the last time. Thank you for the super chat, Jay. Russia says it will provide free grain to countries in need. This comes from Press Secretary Dmitry Peskov. Thank you so much for that, Jay. CNN's not saying that, though. You see that? It's terrible, terrible what our media has become. We're going to go into the next story. This one I am super, super excited to talk about because I grew up during a time when rappers like Tupac and Biggie were huge. I remember where I was and what I was doing when Biggie was killed. I remember where I was and what I was doing when Tupac was killed. So the fact that these two murders in particular have never been solved or put to bed, so to speak, it always sort of bothered me, right? Well, there has been new information that has been released in reference to at least one of them, Tupac's murder. This investigation has a huge update that I think you guys need to hear. I want to show you the announcement about the investigation into Tupac's murder. And then I want to go into, we're going to go back. We're going to do a little bit of a timeline to show you exactly what happened that night. And you're also going to hear from the detective, Greg Kading, who has invested much of his career into solving Tupac and Biggie's murders, about what he said, who killed Tupac. And we'll go from there. But this is breaking news. There has been an update in reference to the Tupac murder investigation. Get a load of this.
And breaking in just the last hour, we are learning that Las Vegas police have searched a home in connection to the murder of Tupac, a murder that's gone unsolved for nearly 30 years. He died, remember, at the age of 25 after being shot in a drive-by in Vegas. You're looking at some of that old footage here. I don't have to tell you that Tupac Shakur, mega huge rap star. A short but legendary career. He sold tens of millions of records worldwide, most of that coming after his death. There has never been an arrest in the case, and police say this new search now, just the last 24 hours in Vegas, is part of an investigation even all these years later into his death. Noah Pransky is joining us now. What else do we know? And does it signal that maybe police are getting closer to solving this this mystery that's been out there for years of who killed Tupac.
Well, I don't want to speculate, but the statement you just read is about all we're getting from police at this point. We do know it took place in Henderson, Nevada, which is a suburb not too far from the center of Las Vegas, southeastern corner of the Las Vegas area. Police looked at this place last night, but we still don't have many new details today. As you mentioned, this case has been going on for 20-something years, unsolved, but in Nevada, there is no statute of limitations on homicides. So police have apparently been continuing to look. It seems like maybe there was some new lead. And Hallie, you know, you look back, there were a lot of police involved in this from Nevada, New York, California. We were talking about East Coast, West Coast rivalries, gang violence. There was a lot of reasons that maybe this case never got solved, but I'm sure a lot of folks crossing their fingers today.
I just want to add really quickly here for those who may not have been born during that time. I just want to add something in reference to what he said about police in California and police in Nevada. Tupac was killed in Las Vegas, Nevada, but even though his death was in Las Vegas, California police were also involved in this case. So it's kind of crazy. There's a lot of information. I have a little bit more updated information than what they have in this video that I'm going to get into in just a second. I'm going to tell you whose house was actually raided in Las Vegas in reference to this investigation. So stay tuned for that.
You know, I feel like we would be remiss not to talk about, when you talk about the death of Tupac, the conspiracy theories that have surrounded his death too. There's been this whole thing like, is Tupac still alive, et cetera. I can only imagine that this search from Vegas police could reignite some of that talk.
Yeah, he's out on a beach chilling with Elvis and some of those other mysteries. But the conspiracies are prevalent on this case. There's a lot of talk about that he survived the shooting. He survived this assassination plot. A lot of people believe he was been hiding all these years in Cuba or Malaysia. His family, his old bodyguards, record executives, they've all leaned into this. And the end result is that it sells a lot of Tupac records. So we'll see what this does. But I'll tell you one thing, you can expect Tupac songs to jump up the list this week.
Lots of questions on this one. Let's see if we get any more from Vegas PD. Noah Pransky, thank you very much.
Okay. So, yes, those theories, I heard all of those theories, like most of my adult life, I heard those theories that he was still alive somewhere and he was hanging out on an island. He wasn't actually gone. I've heard all of that, but I want to get into whose house it was, whose home was raided. So this information was released just a couple of hours ago. Police searched Las Vegas home of man connected to the murder of Tupac Shakur. So let's go down here. I want to get to the part where they talk about the house. On Monday evening, Las Vegas Metro Police searched a local home in the area as part of its investigation into the death of Keep Your Head Up rapper, according to KLAS TV. The home reportedly belonged to Paula Collins, who was married to 60-year-old Dwayne Davis, who is better known as Keefe D. In past interviews, Keefe has claimed to be a former Crip and the uncle of Orlando Anderson, who is rumored to be the man who fatally shot Tupac in 1996. Now, why is this important? So Orlando Anderson is no longer alive, but there was a detective who invested much of his time in reference to this case. He was determined to solve this case, and that was Greg Kading. Now, Greg Kading, Netflix actually had a documentary about this investigation. It was called Unsolved. I'm not sure if you've seen it. I watched the entire documentary, so I know it like the back of my hand, but it was called Unsolved. And the actors who actually played Biggie and Tupac, they did a really good job. Like, they found people that looked pretty much like them. But in this documentary, it's a season, so there's all these different episodes, but they go through step by step by step. So you start from the part where Tupac is still alive, and they go through all of that. And Greg Kading, the guy who plays Greg Kading, is trying to figure out who did this, right? Now, one of the things you need to know if you are not around during that time is there was this whole East Coast, West Coast rivalry in reference to the rap scene. So Tupac was born on the East Coast, so was Biggie, but Tupac moved to the West Coast and he joined Death Row. He said, come join me at Death Row. I'm laughing. I'm thinking about some of the announcements that were made during that time. And he joined with Suge Knight. Now, Suge Knight, you may know some things about him, but he owned Death Row Records. Suge Knight eventually ended up going to jail. There's a whole story about that. But he went out there to the West Coast and he said, I'm West Coast now, right? But there was this beef between Puff Daddy and Tupac, Biggie and Tupac, but it wasn't always that way. And I'm going to explain to you why that happened to begin with, because they actually used to be friends. But first, let's go through the timeline of what happened to Tupac that night. I think it's important to revisit the timeline because people get it twisted sometimes. Sometimes people forget what happened. It was Saturday, September 7th. Let's go into this. At 2:30, Tupac Shakur arrives by car in Las Vegas. At 5:30, people start lining up at Club 662. That's on Flaming Road, where Tupac and Mike Tyson are to appear after the boxing match. So for those who are not aware, Tupac was in Vegas to attend the Mike Tyson fight. Okay, Mike Tyson at this point was still in his heyday. That's where this all starts. At 8:30, people start leaving the Mike Tyson fight that was held at the MGM Grand. Tupac attended the fight, which started at 8 p.m. Tyson was declared the winner after 109 seconds in the ring with Selden. From 8:30 to 9 p.m., Shakur and his bodyguards are involved in a physical scuffle with a man later identified as Orlando Anderson of Compton, California. Now, this is the man that Greg Kading believed actually killed Tupac. This is the man who's related to the gentleman's house that they just raided. So keep that in mind. Near the hotel's Grand Garden, police do not believe the man was in any way connected to the later shooting of Shakur. See, that's what they thought at that time. At 11 p.m., Suge Knight was stopped on Las Vegas Boulevard by Metro Patrol cops for playing his car stereo too loudly and for not having license plates on his rented vehicle. He was not cited and was released a few minutes later. 11:15, Shakur and Suge Knight are shot. Knight is driving and Shakur is in the passenger seat of a 1996 BMW 750 sedan that was eastbound on Flamingo Road. Shakur is shot 3 times in the chest. Shrapnel grazed Knight's head. So this is one of the questions that people have had for years. Some people find it very strange that Tupac was shot multiple times and Suge Knight was right there in the front with him, and a bullet just grazed his head. He wasn't shot. And this is one of the reasons that caused some people to believe that it was Suge Knight who had Tupac killed. Let's go on. Greg Kading believes differently, by the way. A total of 13 shots were fired at the car Shakur was in. After the shooting, Tupac's car made a U-turn and headed west on Flamingo. Police reached the car on the strip where it was caught in traffic at Harmon Avenue. An ambulance then picked up Shakur and Knight, taking them to University Medical Center, where Tupac underwent the first of 3 operations. His right lung is removed to stop the internal bleeding. Sunday, 11 a.m., Suge Knight is released from University Medical Center. 6:20 p.m., Tupac undergoes a second operation at UMC to repair the damage from the bullet wounds. On Monday at 8 p.m., Metro Police and about 20 friends and fans of Shakur are in an altercation over what police call a misunderstanding. Tensions are calmed with the help from a female friend of Tupac's, and 4 men originally handcuffed during the scuffle are released. No one was arrested. Police have been patrolling outside the hospital out of concern for retaliation after the shooting. On Wednesday, September 11th at 6 p.m., Suge Knight is accompanied by his attorneys and speaks about the shooting to Metro Police for about an hour. Friday, September 13th, Tupac Shakur dies from his injuries. So yes, it took a couple of days before Tupac actually passed away. Now, Greg Kading, he was the former LAPD detective that was on this case. He had been saying for years that he knew exactly who killed Tupac. And he also said in an interview that he believed that Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, whatever he goes by today, orchestrated it. Let's get into this. Former LAPD detective says he knows who killed Biggie and Tupac. So this is Greg Kading here. You may have seen him before. He's done a lot of interviews. Let's get into this. Ex-officer Greg Kading was assigned to the robbery homicide division and claims he can put an end to the rumors. I can't play this video because of copyright, but the text is here. In an interview with Vice, he said Orlando Anderson is absolutely positively the murderer of Tupac Shakur. Sean Combs was associated back in New York with a high-level drug dealer named Eric Martin, also known as Zip. Zip was getting drugs from a West Coast gang member who is a Crip named Keith Ed. Stop that. Keith Ed's nephew is Orlando Anderson. He's the individual that got into a fight with Tupac the night that Tupac was shot. Orlando Anderson's the one that was in the back seat of the white Cadillac that pulled up alongside and shot Tupac. So you've got Combs, that's Diddy, Martin, Keith Ed, who was also in that white Cadillac and had secured the gun, gave it to his nephew, and his nephew shot and killed Tupac. In 1998, Orlando Anderson was trying to collect a drug debt. He was in Compton at a car wash and he got into a confrontation where guns were pulled out and shooting and stings of gunfire, and Orlando Anderson was killed at that time in 1998. There's a pretty good chance that Orlando Anderson would have been charged had more time been given to put the case together. But him being dead obviously makes him immune from prosecution. Now there's more, because I do have an interview that I'm going to show a little bit of Greg Kading talking about more about Orlando Anderson and what happened that night. Now, some of you are probably wondering, why would he think that Puff Daddy orchestrated this? Why would he think that Puff Daddy was involved? We're going to get into this. And I've always had suspicions how Puff Daddy just happened to be at both of these murders at the same. He was there when Biggie was murdered. He was there when Tupac was murdered. But yet he seems to walk away clean every time. I've always questioned that. I've always wondered, like, how come he was never, I don't know. But this is what Greg Kading has to say.
So the night in Las Vegas, Suge, his entourage, Tupac, were at the Mike Tyson fight. Mike Tyson won. They're going through the lobby. So why did they attack Orlando Anderson?
They attacked Orlando Anderson because there had been a prior confrontation between the guy that was with Tupac that night in Las Vegas, a guy named Trayvon Lane, and other members of the mob Pyru had been at a mall in outside of Los Angeles. And they ran into Orlando Anderson and some of Orlando Anderson's Crip friends. They all got into a fight. And allegedly, the death row medallion that Trayvon Lane was wearing was stolen, or it was stolen and then recovered immediately during the fight. We're not sure which is the truth. I'm not sure which is the truth. However, there was this conflict And that night in Las Vegas, when Trayvon Lane looks across the lobby of the casino, he sees the same guy that had tried to steal his medallion. And he tells Tupac, you know, there's that motherfucker right there that tried to steal my medallion. And then
so we're going to pause here for just a second. The scuffle that happened at the MGM, right, before Tupac was killed, that was with Orlando Anderson. So this is how this all started. There was a video footage. You probably could find this still online, where Tupac got into a fight. There was a scuffle there at the MGM. That's what he is saying. That's what that was about. It was in reference to, you know, his friend saying, that's the guy who stole, you know, my medallion, my death row medallion. So that actually happened, that scuffle, before Tupac was killed that night.
Tupac just took it upon himself to go over there and involve himself in somebody else's business.
So they leave. What happens? What's the steps of events then that lead up to Tupac's death after they leave the casino?
They leave the casino. You know, they already knew that they were all going to go to Suge Knight's nightclub out in Las Vegas called the 662. Mike Tyson was supposed to make an appearance there. Tupac was going to perform and do some songs there. So it's going to be an after party. And meanwhile, the Crips are all kind of looking at Orlando Anderson like, man, we can't just let this go. You just got your ass kicked in front of a lot of people by a whole, you know, by all of Suge Knight's entourage. So they start putting the wheels into motion to go and retaliate. They know where Tupac's going to be. They know where Suge's going to be. They go and approach a guy who was affiliated with Bad Boy, at least a guy that was affiliated with Puffy. And they say, hey, you know, we have a beef now. This guy offers to give them a gun. He gives Keefe D, which was Orlando Anderson's uncle, a gun. They get into a car and then they set off to find Tupac and Suge.
Keefe D is the guy we were just talking about, the house that was just raided in Las Vegas. Remember, that's the guy who is in the relationship with Paulina, the home that was just raided in Las Vegas. So just FYI, like all these people are connected.
So how, obviously there's a lot of conspiracy theories around Tupac's murder. LAPD done it, like, he done it himself because of the words that are in his songs. Like, there's so much bullshit around this case that it is intriguing as well. Like, nearly 30 years later, we're still talking about it because it is still high profile. Nobody's ever had a conviction. Like, what was your, see, before when you started working on the case between 96 and 98, because Orlando Anderson was never convicted, was there much evidence against him then?
Well, there was circumstantial evidence against him then. We knew that he was the person with the motive. You know, he had just gotten assaulted by Tupac, and so there was always the obvious motive that, hey, this is probably the guy that came back and retaliated. But keep in mind, and this happened in Las Vegas, not Los Angeles. And so there was never a conspiracy that LAPD was involved in Tupac's murder, because that doesn't make any sense. The LAPD had no connection to that. He was killed in Las Vegas.
Yep.
So the really two prominent theories was that Suge Knight either had it done because he believed that Tupac was about ready to leave death row. And he figured, well, he's worth more to me dead than alive if he's going to leave. That was one of the early theories. It didn't really make any sense on the face of it, because surely Suge Knight's not going to hire guys to drive up and shoot directly at him, hoping to hit Tupac instead. So that theory is really always kind of weak. The more likely theory was that these Crips that had just been involved in a fight with Tupac came back and retaliated. And we now know that is exactly what happened after we got the confession of Keefe D. But there was circumstantial evidence. You know, there was reports of a white Cadillac being used. There was an association with these Southside Crips in a white Cadillac. We had the video taped beating of Orlando Anderson that occurred when Tupac assaulted him. So there was that type of evidence, but we had no really strong eyewitness evidence pointing the finger directly at Orlando. And that's why Las Vegas law enforcement were unable to really make any real progress with it. Nobody was cooperating. Everybody wanted to handle it on the streets. And I don't know how this is over in the UK, but in the street culture, in the gang culture in the United States, they have a code that you just don't cooperate with law enforcement. We'll try to figure this out on our own, and we'll handle it on our own. And so that's why both of these cases essentially weren't solved, because the people that were in a position to know things weren't able to, or were unwilling to help.
That's right. This is very important, guys, to understand. Like, this is why they weren't able, even though he was like, you know, it was Orlando Anderson, he wasn't able to just arrest him. Like, they couldn't just take him in because the evidence that they had was circumstantial. It wasn't, 100%. It wasn't airtight, so to speak. Now, you can see this full interview. This interview is over an hour and 30 minutes. It's called "The Truth Behind the Pac and Biggie Murders." Lead detective Greg Kading tells all. So you can see that there. I think Eric put the link to the video in the chat. Now, some of you are probably wondering, why would he think that someone like Puff Daddy or Diddy would actually orchestrate something like that? Especially considering at one point in time that Tupac and Puff Daddy and Biggie were all friends. Well, you have to remember there was another incident that happened before Tupac died that changed that relationship between Puff and Tupac and Biggie. And that was the first time that Tupac was shot. Remember, he was shot before. And we're going to talk about this a little bit. That was the shooting in 1994. Okay? So let's go into this a little bit. I'm going to make this bigger. Thank you. We're just going to fast forward here. Who can forget this night? On Wednesday, November 30th, 1994, Tupac was ambushed and shot inside the lobby of a recording studio in Manhattan's Times Square. Now, this was after he had just spent time in that studio with Biggie and Puff. So why was he in that studio building? He was there spending time with Biggie and Puff. He leaves the studio, goes downstairs to exit the building, and that's where he was shot and robbed. After that, he did survive. He was shot 5 times and he lived. So when Tupac died, it was kind of a shock to people. It's like he survived 5 shots at once one time. But that second time, he did not survive. He was shot 5 times in that lobby of that studio building. And so, of course, when he came to, the first thing that he thought was that Puffy and Biggie set him up, that they had him shot. Now, of course, Puff and Big denied that. But after that incident, the relationship that they had was done. Done, okay? So it goes on to say Tupac's team of criminal attorneys had been in New York with Tupac awaiting a verdict of the sexual assault charges against the rapper. There was also that case. Tupac's attorney afterwards said the shooting looks like a setup and smells like a setup. Later, Tupac publicly blamed Biggie Smalls, who was upstairs in a recording session at the time, in helping to set up the attack. And to make matters worse, it did not help that Biggie, after that, released a song called "Who Shot Ya?" I mean, that didn't help the situation. Did not help at all. Probably not a good idea to make that song. I didn't think that was a good idea. That's just me. That was a stab at Tupac. Tupac released a song called "Hit 'Em Up," and that was a stab at Biggie. So there was this beef, this rivalry going back and forth. But that is why Tupac did not trust Puff and Big. But what you also have to understand is that there's also more to this story in reference to Tupac's death. Over the years, they brushed this off as just like just a gang shooting, that type of thing. Even though Tupac was famous, Tupac never forgot where he came from. He still hung out with his friends in the hood. He wasn't one of those celebrities that was like, oh, I'm not going to go into those neighborhoods anymore. He still would go to house parties. He was himself. He kept it real. So it was easy to just say, well, it was just gang information, just gang squabbles. But there was a theory that one of the things that Tupac was trying to do before he was murdered is that he was trying to unite the Bloods and the Crips and bring back a sort of Black Panther style organization. He was trying to unite the Bloods and the Crips and to get them to start doing mutual aid, to give back to the community, basically get on board with the Black Panther philosophy. Remember, his mother was a Black Panther. So he was very intelligent. He knew a lot about the community and how to help people in the community. And he also knew he didn't like the police. He knew about the police, police brutality. He dealt with police brutality, but also he saw his mother have to deal with police brutality. But there is that theory that is why he was killed. We may never know. We may never know the real reason. But I will say, you got to give kudos here to Greg Kading because he never stopped trying. He never stopped trying to find out who did it. And I think it's one of those cases that just, if you're a detective, it has to just eat at you sometimes at night. That here it is, 20 something years later, and this has gone on unsolved for all these years. I'm not going to get into the Biggie stuff today in reference to who killed Biggie because I don't have my notes on that. But in reference to Tupac, the fact that they do have this new information in reference to the house that was raided in Las Vegas, that speaks volumes. And I never trusted Diddy. I'm just going to keep it real. Never trusted Diddy. Who was this? He was always dancing in the videos, like always in front of the camera. Take that. Like, I didn't know what this guy was supposed to be. It was just weird to those of us, like, growing up during that time in the 90s. I'd see this guy in everyone's video, and I'm just like, who is this, the hype man or something? Like, I didn't understand what his role was supposed to be. But it was also interesting to me that after Biggie died, the way that Puff Daddy blew up as a solo artist, it was weird to me because I didn't think Puffy was a good rapper. Let's just keep it real. Never understood the fascination with that. We knew Biggie was the one with the talent. Puff was just like the producer there. But he was always dancing around in the videos, and I don't know. Bryce said, LMAO, Sabby, too funny. Take that. Go watch some of the videos, guys, and you'll see it, especially for the younger people in the chat. Because some of you may not have been born like in the 90s, but definitely like watch the videos. He's all dancing in front, and I'm just like, what the? I don't know. Kind of felt like a clown show. I know he sampled a lot of people's music. I know that. almost every song he sampled. Oh man. But anyway, big news in reference to Tupac. So I hope they finally get to put this to bed. Can you imagine where Tupac would be today if he were still alive? I don't think he would still be rapping right now. Like, Tupac was like probably the best rapper of my generation. I don't think he would still be rapping. I think he would be involved in other things. Like, if George Floyd protests, I bet you Tupac would have been out there in the streets protesting with the people. That's how real he was, not sitting up in a studio commenting on it. He was a threat. So you knew they had to take him out. Okay, I'll go to the comment on Rockfin, and then we'll go to our last story. Take that. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Puffy hired Keefe D and Crips as bodyguards every time they went to Nevada and California. Yes, after Puffy found out that Suge Knight beat up someone who had information on where in California Puffy's mom had a house. Puffy told Keefe he had to go, but ended up being his nephew, Orlando Anderson. Now I remember hearing an interview from Keefe D on YouTube admitting to this in an interview with Popo since he is dying. And thank you for this tip as well. Please place this in the chat. It isn't one video, but a collection of video segments of Keefe D confessing and how Kading got him to confess. Also, it was rumored that Tupac and Biggie was about to bounce from Death Row and Bad Boy and start their own projects. I figured they could make more money from music off their death. So the new news is the raid of the wife's home. There you go. There you go. I know Roger knows a lot about that. Take that, take that. And thank you for this tip as well. Biggie did encourage him to be an artist, but the one who really blew up was Jay-Z. Little Kim was complaining when she left Bad Boy, saying, how do you blow up as an artist when you are made to compete with your boss who wants to be an artist? Yeah, you know, it was a weird scenario. There was really weird. It was like Puffy was the producer and he owned Bad Boy, but then he also wanted to be an artist. So it was just, JB says, even Suge Knight complained about Diddy being all up in the videos. All up in the videos. In the 90s, people would put their face all in the camera like this, and it was like the fisheye camera. So he'd be like, bad boys. He was a genius at creating one-hit wonders. Biggie was the best artist that he had, to be honest. But he was a genius at creating one-hit wonders. What happened to Craig Mack? What happened to Total? What happened to Making the Band? What happened to all these groups? All right, let me go to some of the chats. A-Ross says, I think Tupac was seen as dangerous to important people. I think so too. Thank you for the chat, super chat, NK. Read the book, The FBI War on Tupac Shakur, the state repression of Black leaders from the civil rights era to the 90s. I can check that out. Thank you, NK. Robert says he was there when Shine bust his guns in the club. That too. Puff Daddy was also there that night when he was dating J-Lo, and they were at a club. This is a different time. They were at a club and there was shooting in the club. Someone got shot and Shine was blamed and Shine went to prison and Puffy once again walked away with his hands clean. Come on now. Baba says P. Diddy wanted to start a gay group with Jay-Z. What? Interesting. I don't know about that. Bebel says, Sabby, when was the interview done in the timeline you shared? Yeah, Eric, we can put the links to that in the chat. That interview, Greg Kading has done interviews recently as well. Like he's done this. He has so many interviews. That interview I shared was uploaded 1 year ago. So it's probably more of one of the most recent ones. Robert said he was there when, oh yeah, I said that. JB says, Asada Shakur was Tupac's godmother. There you go. They saw him as a threat. The last story that we're going to get into, Cornel West had an interview with Anderson Cooper, and we're going to go through part of this, and then also we're going to talk about the statement that has come from James Carville. I call him the Crypt Keeper, out there smearing Cornel West and Jill Stein, doing what he does, just like he did with Bernie Sanders. But let's get started with this clip here. Shout out to K-Steady QB for doing the damn thing. Cornel West interview with Anderson Cooper.
I want to ask you, Senator Manchin up in New Hampshire tonight, he seems to be testing the waters there. He says the parties are too far to the left and to the right. What do you think of his politics?
Well, you know, I just read the pamphlet Common Sense, and my God, they had the audacity to rename that after the great Thomas Paine's revolutionary pamphlet of January 10th, 1976, that was critical of all forms of hierarchy in the name of the dignity of those fly stone called everyday people. I don't think that the No Labels Party, with their hundreds of $1 million flowing already, are fundamentally focused on what I'm concerned about, which is the plight of poor and working people trying to come to terms with the cop cities. Why do the critiques of the cop cities trying to come to terms with striking workers, be they in Hollywood, be they in Amazon, be they at UPS, coming to terms with the eco side, with the fossil fuel companies, steel, corporate greed running out of control. You know, we're at a moment now, my brother, where if we don't come to terms with this massive callousness and indifference to the plight of poor and working people, we're going to lose everything. The planet, democracy, qualitative relations with each other. That's how life and death, like our situation is, my brother. Very much so.
Right. So this is a good point. He talked about Joe Manchin and Anderson Cooper. They're here talking about, you know, their concern is worry about political parties. They're worried about where these political parties are. Meanwhile, Cornel West is like, no, we need to be focused on what's happening with working class people in this country. Do you see how their needs are different? Do you see how their priorities are different? Look at what Dr. West is focusing on and look at what Anderson Cooper and Joe Manchin are focusing on. None of these parties really mean anything if people can't eat. None of these parties mean anything if people don't have a roof over their head. They don't have a place to sleep at night. None of these parties matter if people are suffering and struggling in this country. And yeah, their priorities are misplaced. Who cares about your corporate party and all the donations that you get from corporations? Joe Manchin belongs to the coal companies. So of course he's not going to want to be a part of something that's too far to the left or too far to the right. He's corporate, he's establishment, and that's what helps his best interest. And also that's what helps Anderson Cooper's best interest too. Because let's keep it real. Anderson Cooper is a Vanderbilt. Okay? Vanderbilt, he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Anderson Cooper don't know what it's like to be working class. You think Anderson Cooper ever had to work 2 jobs? You think he ever had to worry about, am I going to be able to pay this light bill this month? You think Anderson Cooper had to worry about, well, damn, I don't have money to get my car fixed. Guess I got to try to find a way to get on the bus. No, a lot of these commentators that you see on these platforms, on the mainstream media platforms, a lot of these people come from wealth and privilege. Okay, so he already had an in.
You know the concern, certainly. I mean, you've been asked this question a million times from a lot of Democrats and Republicans against Trump that a third-party candidate like yourself could siphon votes away from President Biden. David Axelrod recently tweeted saying in 2016, the Green Party played an outside role in the tipping the election to Donald Trump. Now with Cornel West as their likely nominee, they could easily do it again. Risky business. Now, I know you said you don't believe Jill Stein made that big a difference in the vote count in 2016. In Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, her votes did exceed Trump's margin over Clinton. So how do you answer that critique that you will be siphoning votes away and potentially leading to a Trump victory?
Let's pause here for a second because I want to point something out. I want to show you how sneaky they are. 2016 election results. Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. So they have Trump, Clinton, and Stein, right? Okay. You know who they don't have listed here? Gary Johnson. Why don't they have Gary Johnson's name there? Gary Johnson did pretty well. Actually, historically, Gary Johnson's race was a historical victory for the Libertarian Party. Or maybe not victory, but historical success for the Libertarian Party. Did you know that? Did you guys know that Gary Johnson's race in 2016 was that freaking significant because of how well he did? Notice they don't put him up there. Why don't they put him up there? Because they know then they would have to make the same argument they have against Jill Stein. Then they would have to say, well, you know, those Gary Johnson voters, and they can't do that because here's the reality. No Jill Stein, no Gary Johnson. Those people don't come out for the Democrat and Republican candidates. They continue to make this claim. This claim is false. Those voters, the third party voters, they stay home if there is no third party for them to vote for. Now, people bring up, what about Howie Hawkins? He didn't have that turnout. Howie Hawkins was a poor candidate. That's why he didn't have that turnout. Not people weren't enthused after Jill Stein. You think people were enthused to come out and support Russiagate or Howie Hawkins? Give me a break. But you see how they leave that information out. That's important for people to understand.
Well, part of it is that nearly 40% of our precious citizens every 2 and 4 years decide not to vote at all. And we know that the so-called spoilers, which is a category you can imagine I don't accept at all, over 2/3 of those who vote, it could be a Gary Johnson, a Sister Jill Stein, Brother Ralph Nader, whoever, people say they would never vote for the two parties.
Yep.
And I can understand those two parties become too corrupt, their politicians are too conformist.
By the way, you would never hear this on CNN. If it wasn't Cornel West that was running for president and it was someone that was not well known, you would have never heard that. This interview would have never happened. Okay? This interview would have never happened. That's why it's significant to have someone who has a big name. Let me continue here.
Too many of the politicians themselves are just cowardly, will just say anything. What about truth? What about justice? Truth and justice bigger than all of us, bigger than every party, every race, every person. If you're concerned about truth and justice, then you can't be cowardly, complacent, or conformist, and especially if you look at the world through the lens of those who are incarcerated, those who are in ghettos and hoods and barrios. Brother David Axelrod, he looks at the world through the lens of the establishment. Well, of course, from the lens of the establishment, he's concerned about reproducing the establishment. My God, my God. There's no doubt about that. In the 1850s, both parties supported slavery.
But I think he's probably
with
more,
the Labor Party.
I think he seems more, though, I mean, you know David Axelrod, he seems more interested in preventing former President Trump from getting reelected, more than, I'd say, recreating the establishment.
Yes,
he also is very interested in making sure that you guys don't get universal health care either. David Axelrod is another one who was heavily against giving everybody health care in this country. And to Anderson Cooper's weak point, when he says he's more concerned that people might get Trump again, well, then you should be having this interview with Joe Biden, Anderson Cooper, and ask him why he's doing so poorly. Instead of blaming people who are running against Joe Biden, Anderson Cooper should be asking Joe Biden why he's doing so poorly, why his poll numbers are the way that they are. This idea that we're not supposed to sit up here and point fingers and blame Joe Biden and hold Joe Biden accountable because he is the incumbent and because we might get Trump is bullshit. And I'm pretty much tired of it. I don't care. I don't care how long he's been a politician. I don't care how long he's been in office. He has not done a good job. And so instead of, pointing fingers at Cornel West and Anderson Cooper, basically what he's really saying is, why don't you just step aside and just let Joe Biden have this? That's basically what Anderson Cooper is saying.
Well, no, I'm talking about the Democratic Party establishment, though, brother.
Oh, okay.
The Axelrod, you see what I mean? You would agree with he's very much part of the Democratic Party establishment.
Well, his interest. Anyway, I don't want to speak for him, but you criticized
absolutely.
You criticized President Biden, saying recently that he contributed, in your words, I'm quoting, contributed to a crime against humanity when he became the architect of the mass incarceration regime in the 1990s. You're referring to the 1994 Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act that then Senator Biden sponsored. You also said it's, quote, very clear that his cognitive powers are in decline. You have had a remarkable career. You've championed those whose voices have been silenced all your life. We've had you on the program a ton of times talking about that. You've never run a large bureaucracy or had any major governmental leadership role. Isn't that important to actually governing as president?
Apparently not, because look, here's the thing. We have someone, let me tell you what Anderson Cooper just did here. Let me show you how he's sneaky. He just mentioned to you the crime bill, which Joe Biden co-wrote. He said sponsored. You see that? Joe Biden co-wrote the crime bill with racist Strom Thurmond. He leaves that part out. He mentioned all those things that Cornel West has issue with. And then Anderson Cooper goes on to say, don't you think the person in power should be someone that has experience leading government? So what Anderson Cooper is telling you, and listen to this, ladies and gentlemen, what Anderson Cooper is telling you is basically this. Listen, I understand that Joe Biden wrote that bill which targeted Black men and Black families and took Black fathers out their homes, but you need to let him go ahead and have this anyway because he has experience in government. So Anderson Cooper is basically saying F you to African Americans in this country. And I hope people wake up and see that. I hope people really wake up and see what he's really saying underneath. that covert, sneaky-ish. These are the things we really need to pay attention to. Anderson Cooper is the white moderate. He's the white moderate that MLK is talking about. He's privileged. He comes from wealth. He's very comfortable. And even at the end of the day, if that means Anderson Cooper got to tell you, hey, black people, just settle for this right now, he's going to tell you that, but he's not going to say it in those words. Pay attention to that.
Oh, absolutely. I'd have to bring in people who are experienced, but the important thing is your vision and the lens through which you view the world. Policy is something that can be worked out in light of vision. If your vision is one of militarism abroad, then you're going to be preoccupied with wars and militaristic adventures. We've known Biden's got a long history. I don't think he's actually seen a war that he hadn't supported. I think the invasion and occupation of Iraq was a crime against humanity. How many precious hundreds of thousands of Iraqis were killed based on a lie? Well, Biden was running interference in that regard. I think mass incarceration.
Okay, let's go on here because they're getting into the war in Iraq and mass incarceration and all that jazz.
In the United States in the last 40 years is a crime against humanity. I've taught in prisons for 41 years. I've stayed in contact with the rich humanity of my brothers and sisters who have been incarcerated. And many have done things they shouldn't have done. And many are there because they're innocent. But the important thing is, they are sites of barbarity. We ought to be ashamed to live in a country when you look at the conditions of our brothers and sisters who are incarcerated. And it's not just the 1994 crime bill. You can go back to the Biden-Thernstrom. He was a Strom-Thernstrom bills of 84 and 86 and 91 and then 94. You see what I mean? So it's just a matter of trying to be truthful. I'm not trying to trash Brother Biden. I really not. I'm trying to make him accountable for his actions in light of how the wretched of the earth are treated in this nation and around the world. And that's true for any politician, be it Obama, Biden, Clinton, Bush, Trump. All of them have to be measured by the same standard of truth and justice.
I want to ask you about the war in Ukraine because I saw.
See, no, he got to pivot to another question now. But no, I told you there were multiple crime bills that Joe Biden wrote.
You tweeted out, you said NATO is an expanding instrument of U.S. global power that provoked Russia into a criminal invasion and occupation of Ukraine. You said this proxy war between the American empire and the Russian Federation could lead to World War III. We must stop the war and war crimes, including cluster bombs used by all parties, and embark on diplomatic talks that should lead to a just peace. You believe, I mean, how are you going to bring all sides to the table on Ukraine? And do you really believe that NATO provoked Russia into invading Ukraine?
Well, when Russia was
the same way you bring both sides to the table with any other war conflict.
Promised that NATO not move 1 inch, and then a few years later, you got 13 former Soviet.
But wait a minute, but wait a minute. But you're talking about in 1990, there was an agreement signed that right. NATO would not move into East Germany, but actually nothing was said about further east, and it was at the very least it was ambiguous.
That is a damn lie. Anderson Cooper is outright lying.
U.S. You can. There's an argument.
It was formal and informal talks, but I mean, you know, the great George Kennan, who's probably had the finest minds of the establishment when it comes to foreign affairs. He said he doesn't understand why NATO needs to exist any longer because it's defensive. Well, the collapse of the Soviet Empire meant, in fact, you no longer even needed NATO. Europe could come up with its own security.
Okay, sorry, let's go on. Case study has to cut these in smaller clips, guys, because of the Twitter limit for like the 2 minutes and 20 seconds with the Twitter limit. Okay.
But
it doesn't seem like that because the people
as an arm of the American empire. That's the challenge.
You don't believe, though, that the people of Ukraine right now need NATO to defend against Russian aggression?
Well, the people of Ukraine right now who are suffering, and I'm in deep solidarity with their suffering, they are being caught between this proxy war between the American empire and the Russian Federation. Federation. Now,
but that's not really true. But Dr. West.
See, notice Anderson Cooper continues to interject here because Anderson Cooper's job, particularly at CNN, is to keep the narrative that Ukraine did absolutely nothing wrong. So he has to continue to interject here like, whoa, we can't let that message get out on here. They can't 100% completely ignore Dr. West because he is so popular. A lot of people know him, so they got to bring him on and interview him. But at the same time, they have to find a way to still keep the war narrative that the U.S. government has and the State Department has, that mainstream media has decided to spread, across the country. They have to make sure that they can still maintain that.
I mean, it wasn't early on. I mean, you're far more educated than I am, but early on, it was Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary who wanted to join NATO. Warsaw Pact countries, suddenly free, did not want to be under the yoke of the former Soviet Union any longer, and they are the ones who applied to join NATO. It wasn't the U.S. pushing these countries in an expansion play. It was these countries suddenly free, the people in those countries saying, we want to be in the EU. NATO is the fastest way. It's a kind of a stepping stone in the EU. We want that. We want to turn to the West. No, would you?
I'm pretty sure the U.S. had a hand in that. I'm pretty sure those countries just didn't wake up one day and say, hey, I want to be part of this too. I'm pretty sure there were some talks. And I'm pretty sure those talks were instigated by the U.S. Get out of here, Anderson. Anderson Cooper has traveled to all these different countries over the years. So when I was in high school, we actually had this program we used to watch in homeroom called Channel 1. And on Channel 1 was Lisa Ling. And every now and then Anderson Cooper would be a part of it and would pop up. And he would be out investigative in the field somewhere. He's in the Middle East. He's in Europe. He's over here. He's over there. And I remember I used to think that Anderson Cooper, when I was going into broadcast journalism, I used to think that Anderson Cooper was, wow, that's someone to aspire to be like in broadcast journalism. And then I got older and I learned more and I started to see more. And I realized this guy is just a freaking puppet. Yikes.
You have denied Hungary, Czechoslovakia, the choice?
Well, I mean, one, I would have followed George Kennan. I would have abolished NATO right after the collapse of the Soviet Empire, and I would have tried to welcome Russia into the nation, the community of nations, rather than trying to push them against the wall. We know that their system of repression and domination is one in which they're going to feel as if their backs are against the wall. And I think you would probably agree that if Russia or China had missiles in Canada or Mexico targeting Washington, D.C., U.S. government would blow them to smithereens. That's how empires behave. You've read the history. I know the history. We're critical of imperial activity, no matter who it is, American, Russian, and what have you. But America is the most powerful empire in the world, in the history of the world, my brother. And it seems to me if we can't dismantle that empire in order to empower poor and working people here and abroad, we're going to lose our democracy. It's almost like Rome, it was Cato the Younger and Cicero against Julius Caesar.
Right, but
what happens when your empire begins to take over your democratic possibilities?
But Anderson Cooper doesn't want to talk about working class people. Anderson Cooper doesn't care about working class people. He doesn't care about the homelessness issue. He don't care about any of these things because Anderson Cooper has been privileged and wealthy his entire life. He doesn't care about anything like that. He's fine with the U.S. empire. He's fine with the U.S. government, intervening in other countries. That's more work for him, especially when he was an investigative journalist. That helped out his career. That's how he gets to sit in that seat he's in right now. I did my work out in the field. I traveled to all these countries. My turn for that anchor spot. And he probably got that investigative reporter job because he was a Vanderbilt. So let's keep it real. There have been doors and opportunities that have been open for Anderson Cooper that will never be open for us because of who we are. Because we don't have that name or the recognition. So he don't care about working class people. This is why he didn't really care about Medicare for all. None of these policies that people like Cornel West, even Marianne and Bernie Sanders, these policies that they ran on that would help working class people, those things just go right over Anderson Cooper's head because he doesn't understand it because he's never had to live it. And that's something that needs to be pointed out. And most of those commentators that get on these spots, similar situations, they had an in.
Spoke to the foreign minister of Ukraine. We're going to have that interview.
And we'll go to the next clip here. Sorry. And there's just one more clip after this one I want to get to for this conversation.
Later on, I think if you said to him, you're standing with the people of Ukraine in solidarity, and you're saying that they are just victims in this proxy war, he would say, you're out of your mind.
You don't think the civilians aren't victims? You don't think the people in Ukraine aren't victims? They don't have anything to do with this. They didn't sign up for this war.
I mean, they are thankful. They are thankful for NATO. They are thankful for the U.S. You can call it the American empire, but I mean, they are thankful for all these countries rallying to their side. I mean, I've been there. You've probably been there as well. I mean, it's a horrible. It's an invasion. I mean, of killing civilians in cities.
Oh, no, it is a criminal invasion. I'm not denying it's a criminal invasion, but what I'm saying is, you go back to the men's talks. You go back to March, 1 month after the war began, my brother. I'm calling for ceasefire. I don't want to see
you
the
can call it for
suffering of
ceasefire.
precious
Vladimir
Ukrainians.
Putin isn't really listening to it.
See how he cut him off when he said the word ceasefire? See, they don't want that message to get out. They don't want the message to get out. We need to have negotiations. We need to call for peace. We need to call for ceasefire. This is why you don't see people like Medea Benjamin on there. They don't want that message to get out. So let me go ahead and interrupt him now that he let him say all that other stuff. But as soon as you say something like ceasefire, let me go ahead and interrupt him. Sorry, I cut off.
You can call it for ceasefire. Vladimir Putin isn't really listening to what you say or I say or anybody says. He's doing what he wants to do, just like he slaughtered. I mean, you saw what he did to Grozny. You saw what he did to Grozny in the.
They called for negotiations earlier on. This is not to say that Russia is innocent, but Anderson Cooper is purposely leaving that information out.
90s, I mean, he flattened that city. Civilians were trapped in that city. No, the world didn't come to the rescue of Grozny. He did exactly what he wanted to do. I mean, unchecked, he will slaughter people.
Well,
you mean the same way our government has done to other countries? Who's checking the U.S. government? Who was checking the U.S. government when they were giving arms to Saudi Arabia so that Saudi Arabia could slaughter people in Yemen? Who was checking the U.S. government? Who's checking the U.S. government when they drop drones on people in Somalia? Who was checking the U.S. government when they sent Marines to Haiti to take over their businesses and their banking? Who was checking the U.S. government? You see, this is the problem. Nobody checks the U.S. government. Think about it. This idea that, well, he said he just wants to do whatever he wants to do. Haven't we been doing the same damn thing? Hasn't the U.S. government been doing whatever the fuck they want to do when it comes to other countries for centuries? Get out of here, Anderson. Get out of here.
I mean, unchecked, he will slaughter folk. Unchecked, what we did in Iraq was slaughtering people. Unchecked, what we've done in other places. Unchecked,
but sir,
a variety
Dr.
of
West,
other empires.
Dr. West, do you really?
Not allowed to say that. Not allowed to talk about what happened to people in Iraq. Those poor kids, the women and children in Iraq, we're not allowed to talk about that. Notice when it comes to the women and the children, they don't care about the women and the children in those countries, though.
They do that, though.
No, I understand.
They're wrong. And when they're wrong, you have to pull up. You have to point it out.
I respect you. You know, I love you. But I do think it's inappropriate to compare the Russian bombing of Grozny and what we witnessed there with the war in Iraq. I mean, to say that innocent.
Why? Because of the groups of people that were affected? Because the people being affected right now are European versus the people that were affected in the Middle East? Because of the people, right? You know, there is this lack of sympathy when it comes to people in those Middle Eastern countries. Let's keep it real, guys. Let's keep it real. I don't see Anderson Cooper and all these other commentators crying about what's happening to the poor people in Somalia. I don't see them crying and saying, oh, those poor people in Yemen. They don't care about those people. Those people don't have the right complexion. I said it.
and the innocents are killed. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, the horrible things happen.
Half a million Iraqis killed, my brother.
Well,
500,000.
Yeah, listen, I was there. I mean, I was there. I was there.
You were there. He was there, and he knows. Anderson Cooper don't care about the Iraqi people. Those people don't matter to Anderson Cooper. Think about that, folks. He was literally there. Yeah, all those people died. I was there. I know. Here he is agreeing with Dr. West that all those people were killed. But he don't really care. He don't give a shit.
It's true. I certainly understand. I also saw a lot of Americans getting killed, and I saw, the horrors of Saddam Hussein. I'm just saying, I don't.
This is not about the American people. See how they try to bring in, this is colonizer mindset bullshit. This is colonizer mentality. Let's talk about the millions of people that died in Iraq that had nothing to do with this war. Well, there were also Americans that, let me bring in the other people. Let's bring in the Western folk who were also injured and harmed. Think about this, people. American soldiers that joined the military that were deployed to Iraq, right? Those are soldiers. American soldiers deployed there. There's a big difference from the people who just live in that country, who are not soldiers, who lost their lives. Do you see what I'm saying? To me, let's insert the Western ideology. Don't forget about the West. They always do this shit. Always. Excuse my language today. Sorry.
And I also saw a lot of Americans getting killed, and I saw, the horrors of Saddam Hussein. I'm just saying, I don't think it's accurate to compare the pummeling of a city by Russian artillery with civilians inside, pummeling every single day with the intention.
Didn't we do the same thing? Don't even come back and talk about, let me say something. Don't even come back and talk about the video footage of American soldiers doing what they did to Iraqi citizens. Don't even come back and talk the pictures that were taken. And I'm talking about civilians. I'm not even talking about the soldiers. Let's think about that for a second. And Anderson Cooper's actually going to sit here and pretend like it's not the same. Don't make the comparison. He don't want you to make the comparison, boo, because it's not the right complexion. That's what this is really about. The United States government supports and backs a colonizer mindset that embraces Christianity. They don't support and back people from the Middle East that may embrace Islam. Think about that. You don't have the Christian religion. This is why I say America is a conservative country. If you don't have the Christian religion, you suspect. You have religion, but the God that you choose to worship is not Christ. They looking at you with a side eye. This is the last clip here.
Of just destroying and flattening a city with actions the U.S. took. I mean, I don't know. Look, wars, horrible things happen in wars, and it's horrible.
War, that's absolutely. But I mean, and I know any comparative analysis of levels of barbarity and cruelty is going to lend itself to this ugly algebra of blood that we don't want to get into. But all I'm saying is you can't just jump into a situation where people are being treated barbarically. There's no doubt that Ukrainian people are being treated in a barbaric way. That's that murderous way. There's no doubt about that. But the context is one in which that did not have to be if the expansion of NATO, and NATO is an arm of the American global power network.
What you're saying though in Ukraine is that the Ukrainians, they're just going to have to compromise and give up their land because they're just in the wrong.
That is not what he said. You see this? Also, why can't he straighten his neck? What is this? Is he what is this? His head been to the side the entire interview. Giving me whiplash.
No, I'm not saying that.
Well, you said there have to be hard
want a just
compromises
peace.
on all sides. You said there have to be
I
hard
want a just
compromises.
peace.
You said there have to be compromises on all sides, and you know compromise for Ukraine means Crimea. It means whole parts of their east. Is that fair?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I want a just peace for my Ukrainian brothers and sisters, and I don't want World War III. I don't want World War III. The way that we're moving now, we got 3,000 advisors. Well, we heard that in Vietnam. We're on the way to possible nuclear exchange. How ugly. Here we got Trump pushing us toward the second civil war at home. You got Biden pushing us toward a third world war abroad. We need an alternative. That's what this campaign's probably about, my brother.
Dr. West, I appreciate your time tonight, as always.
No, indeed. Love you. Even when we disagree. love you, man.
You take care.
I don't love him. Dr. West, you nice because I don't. And I'm going to need for him to straighten his neck because that is really bothering me. But if you could imagine, they also brought back the Crypt Keeper. Now, you know this guy, anytime there's some type of uprising from the left or any type of shift away from center or center right, they always go back and reach into the crypt and pull out the Crypt Keeper and ask this guy what he thinks the American people should do. And I'm talking about James. So James decides to smear Cornel West and Jill Stein. Listen to this.
You hear Dr. West? What is your reaction to what he had to say? Do you think he rejects the term spoiler candidate. Do you think he could be?
Well, first of all, he's obviously an accomplished scholar, academic. He seems to be a very charming man. And he's also a menace to the threat of the continued constitutional order in the United States. And if I say that.
What is the constitutional order in the United States? What do you mean? What do you mean constitutional order? What is this? Some secret society? Listen to the way he talks. Why are we still taking advice from people who are stuck in the past? Why are we still taking advice from people who don't want anything to change? They don't want any kind of movement. They want everything to sit exactly where it is. Why are we taking their advice? Every time I turn around, when somebody that's running progressive style or challenging the status quo, they go and reach in their back pocket, CNN and MSNBC, they reach in their back pocket and they pull out the Crypt Keeper. Every time I turn around, this man's face popping back up on the screen as if he's still relevant. Why can't you just retire and just keep it as it is? Jesus.
Because look what Ralph Nader was directly responsible for the election of George W. Bush, which brought about this horrific Iraq war and this horrific.
Ralph Nader was not responsible for George W. Bush. This is ridiculous. George W. Bush. Do we all remember what happened during that election? Stop blaming Ralph Nader. Stop blaming Ralph Nader. Come on. He was a Bush. Jesus Christ. I can't with this man.
Economic downturn we had, among other things. Jill Stein, who's his campaign manager, is almost certainly an agent of the Russian government. If you don't believe me, somebody at home, Google photo, General Flynn, Vladimir Putin, Jill Stein.
First of all, this was already debunked. In fact, I sent this to Jill. I'm going to tell you what she said. Hold on. I sent this clip to Jill. This guy is such a God. She said, oh, hold on. Jill said a 3-year investigation by the Senate Intelligence Committee laid that slander to rest. Guess he didn't read it. You see how he's still here spewing lies? This guy is horrible. Absolutely horrible.
Google photo, General Flynn, Vladimir Putin, Jill Stein. She was.
So you're guilty if you took a picture with somebody. Okay. Donald Trump has taken pictures with Vladimir Putin. Barack Obama has taken pictures with Vladimir Putin. Is Barack Obama also a Russian asset? No, because you're not going to say that about Barack Obama because he fits your bill. He's status quo. He's exactly what you want him to be. I don't understand how people can listen to this and not understand that there is something seriously wrong with our country. The way that they just smear people. They don't want you to have a true democracy in this country. They're telling you, you better pick one party or the other party, and that's it. And that's the only choice that you should have. Let me let Crypt Keeper finish.
Hosted by the Russians prior to her running in 2016. So, you know, people are going to have to decide, do we want to continue under our Constitution? Because Donald Trump is telling us that very clearly, is bragging about the fact that he doesn't want to live under the Constitution anymore. And it's very clear that the only thing that Dr. West's candidacy can do is help elect Donald Trump.
Does the Constitution, let's talk about the Constitution. Did the Constitution prevent the overturn of Roe v. Wade? Does the Constitution prevent unarmed Black people from being killed by the police and the police having no accountability? What exactly does the Constitution do for you today? You know, it's just, these people live in the past, you know? I don't know. Maybe he was alive during the Constitution. I don't know. He Crypt Keeper. But all I'm saying is like, nobody thinking about this mess, man. You're talking about a document that was written when none of us were alive to begin with anyway. A document that was written not for people like me, a document that was written for white men, particularly those who own property. And that's what you want to focus on in 2023? That's where you are now? Give me a break.
It's nothing. I don't think any of that's inarguable, nor is it arguable that Jill Stein had deep relationships with the Russian government.
So let me ask you, because
this guy is such a liar. Do you see this? Nobody pushes back. Does Anderson Cooper push back here? No, he doesn't, because that fits his narrative. Jesus Christ.
you know the argument that Ralph Nader put forward, you know the argument that Jill Stein has put forward, Dr. West mentioned it again tonight, that a lot of those people who voted for Jill Stein or Ralph Nader would not have voted for any of the mainstream candidates, and therefore they did not suck away votes from Hillary Clinton or would not hurt votes from Biden here.
Well, how could I argue with that? I'm sure that some of it's true, some of it's not true.
I mean,
all of it's true. All of it is true. Anderson Cooper won't interview those people, though. Do you see Anderson Cooper out in the street with a microphone asking people who supported Jill Stein? Do you see them interviewing as many times as they want to do these panels of Democrat voters and Republican voters? Do you see them doing a panel on CNN of people who supported Jill Stein or people who supported Gary Johnson? No, you don't. Because they don't really want to hear what you think. And if you ever see that, it's going to be people that they handpicked, and 9 times out of 10, those motherfuckers are liars anyway. They don't want you to hear it.
There's no way to know whether somebody could tell a pollster, oh, no, of course I wouldn't vote for any other candidate, but who knows how people would vote.
There is a way to know. And if you're a so-called journalist like you say you are, the way to know is to interview those people. That's how you know. So miss me with the there is no way to know BS.
I can't disprove that, nor what I want to. But what I do know, there was Russian help that were telling Black voters in Detroit to vote at the wrong place or to vote on Wednesday and not Tuesday. That I do know.
He doesn't think Black people in Detroit are smart enough to know when Election Day is. Like, what? I don't know how people fall for this. And I got to say, I got to keep it real. Let me play this last clip because there's another part of this. I got to keep it real. Well, let me play this first and I'll tell you what I got to say about the bourgeoisie.
I do know that Jill Stein was in Moscow, was sitting with General Michael Flint, with Vladimir Putin, was on Russian TV from Red Square.
A lot of people were on RT. So what? I know people who just vacation. So now it's bad that you even went to Moscow. Don't you know that's a tourist attraction? What the hell? Let's go back and check and see who all else was on RT.
Attacking the United States itself, and I do know, I'm told that's his campaign manager, and it's the same outfit that cost us the election in 2000, could have very well cost us the election in 2016.
What cost you, first of all, who's us? Notice how he says us. He's talking about the Democratic Party. What cost you the election in 2016 is the fact that the Democratic Party chose the losing candidate to be the nominee. We went over this. We went over the polls. At one point, how Bernie was beating Hillary Clinton and the DNC selected Hillary Clinton, who was actually the losing candidate. We went over all this. That's why you lost. Jesus Christ. I can't.
And I'm just sitting here with a clear present warning. Don't fall for this. Do not fall for this. Only bad can come about this.
And no bad has come from you voting for the Democratic Party. No bad has come from you voting for the Democratic Party. What has changed in your life? What has progressed in your life?
What about Joe Manchin? Do you think he actually is serious?
I hope not. And they keep saying that no labels, if they think it's going to help Trump, they won't run. Well, I can tell you right now, it's going to help Trump. No, there's not a single that I know would argue otherwise. And plus,
I don't think he realizes that this time around, people aren't as afraid of Donald Trump becoming president as they were the first time. I don't think he realizes that. This whole thing is going to help Trump. It's going to help Trump. Trump is seriously beating Ron DeSantis in the polls. He just gained 35 points against Ron DeSantis in the recent poll that I shared last night. Like, they really think that this is, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't think people are that fearful this time around. I really don't, because now we've had Biden.
their argument is just flatly ridiculous on his face that Trump and Biden represent two extremes. I mean, Trump is obviously one of the most extreme people in the United States. Biden is certainly not an extreme man. You may say he's more liberal than I would like, but to equate the two,
more liberal than he would like. You see that? That's how the Democratic Party has moved. More liberal than he would like. Democratic Party is right wing.
Is absurd. But I think that when they get closer to this decision, at least I hope that they see that the only thing that they can do is help elect Trump. And it's a shame, but President Biden, the Democrats are being caught by the leftists on one side, and I don't know what you'd call them, no labels people, but kind of caught between. And somebody better think about the good of the future of the United States, because that's literally what's at stake here.
James Carville, thank you.
If he was worried about the good of the future of the United States, we wouldn't be supporting two corporate parties in the first damn place. James thinking about what's good for his pocket. Majority of Americans don't even vote. There's a reason for that. Isn't that terrible? You see what they're doing? I told you every time, let's go back and pull out the Crypt Keeper. I'll take the comment on Rockfin, Eric. Boy, I tell you. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Besides Biggie, MJB was Puffy's only other long-lasting artist. This was a perfect opportunity for West to hit AC with, why are you showing me the percentage of who voted green when you know full well that we don't elect president by votes, but by the Electoral College vote? And since it is winner-take-all system, Stein, Hawkins, Nader, Perot won 0 Electoral College votes, meaning 0 states. It's like they weren't even in the race. That's a really good point, Roger. Anderson Cooper former CIA. Oh, I don't know what happened there. Oh, okay. Anderson Cooper, former CIA. Now, if the goal is to use elections to get the policies you want and a third party in the last 50 years received no ECVs, then there is a better chance of getting those policies using citizen ballot measures on the ballot than there is to get West elected. I don't care how we all feel about West. This must come before everything. Thank you for that, Roger. Thank you for the super chat, Susan. These upper financial people are completely insulting and biased to their interests and nobody else. Thank you for the super sticker, dogs in slow motion. That's a cute name. A puppy on the beach. Dave says Cornel West is trying to destroy my stock portfolio. Thank you for the super chat, Janice. Anderson Cooper telling us Iraqis can find sympathy in the dictionary between shh and syphilis. Dude is evil. Greg says, so it's okay to have pictures with Netanyahu, but not Putin. Ouch. That's a good point. Thank you for the super chat, Janice. Haven't seen a panel since 2016 when they asked us who was planning to vote third party, and more than half the voters raised their hands. And Nelson says they are well off, so they don't want anything to change and don't care about those struggling because it doesn't affect them. Thank you so much, Nelson. Well, guys, that is it for me today. I know it was weird kind of seeing me on a Wednesday, but I'll be back tomorrow night, my usual time. And don't forget, I'm not here Friday or Sunday this week. Sabby is traveling, and then I'll be back next week on that Tuesday. But other than that, I hope you learned something. Share, like, subscribe if you're new. Like, it helps me with the algorithm. And other than that, guys, I got a skadoodle. It is time to do the damn thing. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.